Welcome, welcome, ladies and gents. Welcome to the second official cross-border ecosystem builder forum. Although we have received about 60 RSVPs, we'll have to work with the things that we have for now. So thank you all for coming. Please take your front seats, front rows. Alexander, wherever you are, please take your jacket and sit up front. 네, 오늘 두 번째 크로스보더 이코시스템 빌더 포럼을 진행하게 돼서 너무 감사하고요. 이렇게 원래 지금 계속 다른 시간대마다 참석자들이 계속 늘어날 예정이라 자리해 주시면은 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 먼저는 저희 포럼의 의장님이신 김대진 이사장님 모시고 오프닝 스피치 시작하도록 하겠습니다. We'll start with Derek Kim with the +7 opening speech.
리더 제 PPT 5장 혹시 띄워줄 수 있나요? 네. I have the same one. I have used the same page. Okay. Welcome to the Cross-Border Ecosystem Builders Forum. Are you the cross-border ecosystem builders? Yes, actually. I have worked in this ecosystem. Before the VSA, we usually in Korea we have told it's a global ecosystem, but most of people think is in Korea global means only one way. It's global expansion to overseas or overroad from Korea. So they are thinking only there is global expansion from Korea, so we have changed the name as from global to the cross-border because this is the interactive ecosystem, and not one way, both way. So we made a cross-border ecosystem builders forum, and then it's the nowadays not many, but more than 5. Some organizations have used same word cross-border. I found it is the last some months that they are using. So actually when I started the startup ecosystem in the 2014, is after I resigned from the old work, then I have been involved into the global ecosystem in Korea, but many people thought global means only some few countries like the US, Silicon Valley, Boston, or New York. Or after some time, they are thinking the Northern Europe like Sweden, Finland, Slush. Actually, Slush has started 2012, I think. I have been from 2014. It's the very early stage. At that time, only the 800 participants was there. But in this year, I heard is the 80,000 participant has registered already. So this is a big. So many people thought North Europe is booming, and after some years also some Western Europe like Germany, Paris, UK. But still, many Korean think such a country only is workable for the startups, but. Currently, I am doing the project manager for some entrepreneurship project in Bangladesh, and even the Bangladesh is now very emerging in the startup ecosystem. Already, the last year, one unicorn was one startup has been the unicorn, and then it's maybe this year another one. Also, some African country also doing very well. In the Middle East, in South America, so it's the. Now I think we have to change our view, our eye to the such country. So it is our focus currently. This year, one of some important issues for our groups, including me, is we are next month we're gonna go to the South Africa because it's the. South Africa has hosted one big event in the startup ecosystem this year, World Business Angel Investor Forum, the Congress. Then it's the also South Africa now is very emerging, and then it's the the best country in Africa area, as far as I know, is for the startups. So today's keynote speech, Timothy will introduce the South Africa ecosystem very well, I think. This is our event, World Business Angel Invest Forum. Is from 160 countries, delegation will participate in this event. In Korea, for the last 5 years, the maximum 2 people has participated in this event in year. But this year is the very I'm very exciting because it's this year for our WPF member. It means it's the 2 senator and 2 international partner, and Shane Kong from the Korea Accelerator Association. Another 2 is Korean Africa Foundation, and also it's the luckily 3 startups from 3 Korean startups has passed is some the screen for the global top 100 startups is to present it the global fundraising stage is to get the investment. Minimum is minimum $500,000 million to max $3 million. So I hope it's one of the any of our Korean startups will get it to be such kind of investment in this event this year. Also, in this year event, we're gonna do some the Africa startup summit include in this event. It's a special event we will do. So many startups globally, 100 startups has joined together and to see how much or what was changed in Africa is now. Yeah, this is some the grand opening last year grand opening portal. So this kind of things is we are doing for the Cross Builder Forum. This year we did is one official forum. This is the second forum, and then between the official forum, we're gonna do some small event. So I hope all of you enjoy at this time, and then we're gonna see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we're going to move on to our first official session by Timothy Dickens. Please welcome Timothy to the stage, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you so much to Mr. Kim and to Rizzo for putting this event together. I think it's fantastic from a number of reasons. I think number one, obviously, the startup community requires a lot of support, a lot of input, a lot of sharing of ideas and interest points. But number two, I think as importantly, put on the slide, Rising Star Africa. From a personal perspective, this is a region in the world which I think over the next 20 to 60 years is going to be the dominant market across the board and across sectors. And I'll get into details about that throughout the discussion. We have about, I guess, 45, 50 minutes to work through a couple of things. I've tried to break the session down into 3 sections. I think the first section, I'll give a bit of background about myself, about the South African Chamber of Commerce in Korea, and also an initiative that we're starting for the African Chamber of Commerce for Korea. Secondly, I'll touch on the legal systems and entry points into the African market. So obviously as startups, if you're looking to open up your businesses, what sort of high-level points you need to look at and consider from the African perspective. And then lastly, we'll do a sort of general overview of a high-level interest points of Africa. So why do we see Africa as a market that's up and coming? Why do we see that that's an area that we need to put a lot of investment into? To give you some background about myself, I was born in South Africa, grew up there, studied there, worked there, and I moved out to Korea some 10 years ago. I'm a lawyer by trade, so my day job is doing international cross-border transactions for our clients, which includes a lot of our startup clients. Whether that's into the African market, and obviously we focus on more the sub-Saharan African region, but that doesn't exclude us from assisting from the other regions in Africa. The second part of my job, or my second hat, my evening job, so to say, is I head up the South African Chamber of Commerce in Korea. We're also the only African Chamber of Commerce in Korea. So that means, although we are South African-based, we look at assisting African companies across the board. So whether you're in Central Africa, Northern Africa, where we can assist our brothers and sisters on the continent, that's where we look at assisting. So that's just a bit of background about ourselves. For the South African Chamber of Commerce, we were founded in 2017. We currently have around 50 or 60 members, but a lot of those are more individuals, so individuals that are like yourselves starting up eco-friendly companies, import companies, but very startup-minded. We don't have any massive African companies in Korea, and I think that's one of the challenges for us to get in and outbound transactions between Africa and Korea. To give you some overview, Korea's total trade volumes with Africa, not just the country in Africa, but the whole of Africa is 1%. Now, if we look at the market size, Africa currently has 1.4 billion in terms of population. That's equivalent of China. Korea's trade with China is 22%. So you can see there's a lot of movement that the needle can make from Korean companies looking for opportunities in Africa. And that's one of the things that we're doing from the Chamber's perspective, is obviously to assist in increasing those trade volumes and flow. It's not only trade, it's culture, it's discussions on education, sharing ideas, and the other part is raising the profile of Africa. So many of you will know Africa. I think Mr. Kim mentioned it earlier. The world, people always see North America, Europe, maybe some parts of Asia, but they forget about Africa, and Africa has a phenomenal amount of opportunity across the board. And we'll get into that in the third session as to the sort of highlight points. So what I'll do is, I think on the first presentation point, it's got to do with a current undertaking from the South African Chamber of Commerce in terms of creating an African Chamber of Commerce in Korea. So why we want to do that, we want to incorporate as many of the African companies that we have in Korea under one banner, simply because we don't have enough. If you look at US interest, if you look at the US Chamber of Commerce, they have 800 plus members. The British European Chambers of Commerce, they have 500-600 plus members, and those are big company names. You can't think of one African company name that's based in Korea that comes off the top of your head. And I think that's what we're trying to do in terms of establishing this and moving forward in terms of developing the industry, developing the African market, but also developing the relationships with Korea. I think from a Korean perspective, fantastic technology, fantastic human resource, but actual physical resource, there's not a huge amount of. Africa has the resource, but they don't always have the technology and the ability. So I think in terms of the sharing of those benefits between the countries will be something critical to look at. I wonder, in terms of the slides, can we open the first one? I think it's relation to, I can just push this one. There you go. Thank you. So one of the initiatives that we wanted to get into is the African Chamber of Commerce, and why we wanted to get into this. So the question of why, what is the main important part? So from the South African Chamber of Commerce's perspective, operating for the last 7-8 years, we see the limitations in terms of just a South African Chamber of Commerce. Firstly, I'd mentioned that we don't have a huge amount of African companies based in Korea. So when we compare, as I said, to the other big chambers, we're far off the mark. So from that perspective, we want to incorporate as many of the African institutions, but it's not just African institutions. So it's a two-way bilateral in and out. So Korean startups that are looking for the African market, we also want to be that bridge in terms of saying we have partners on the continent, how to do business there, what are the difficulties, where we can get funding, for example, and trustworthy partners. So that's one of the main issues. Untapped opportunities, and I think I've touched on this in terms of the infrastructure. So the 1% that I'd mentioned is, from my perspective, doing business with Africa, and from a Korean perspective, is too low. That we can put up to 10-15%, and I think going forward in 20-30 years, that should be up to 20% from African perspective. If you look at the population of Africa, by 2050, it'll be up to 2.5 billion. So in terms of a consumer market, I mean, if you're not looking at that region, you must be colorblind. I enjoy speaking to startups like yourselves simply because you are the companies that are looking to the future. You're looking at ways in which you can facilitate development of technology, facilitate the development of the countries, new industries. You're going to be leaders in the sectors. And also you have the appetite to be more risk-taking because you see the opportunities. If I can give an example why we talk to the big Korean conglomerates, corporate clients, their appetite for investing and looking into the African market is very restricted for a number of reasons. And obviously, they have shareholder issues. They need to have, return on investments, but they also look at a very short term. As startups, one of the things I can sort of encourage from your perspective is look at long term. If you want to invest in the African region, look 20 years, 30 years, 40 years down the road, because that's when you or your company might be, the next Apple, the next Coca-Cola, etc. So that's the untapped opportunities. One area where there's a non-FTA from Korean African countries. Korea as a country has the most FTAs of any country in the world, except with an African country. So if you look at that perspective again, that just shows you that up until now, Korea hasn't really focused on the African market in terms of increasing trade and developing that trade. And I think that's somewhere where they are losing out in the long run to other countries, maybe like the US or China, who are heavily involved in the area. An important part, last year in 2022, the African Free Trade Agreement was signed, which means that intra-Africa trade has now opened. So the benefit for you as a startup company is once you're in the market, you have access to that consumer base. So that means you're opening up currently, 1.3, 1.4 billion, and that's only going to increase over time. The last point for untapped opportunities, the lack of knowledge and understanding. So I think, Mr. Kim mentioned it well. Africa is not a region where people understand or know what the business opportunities are on the continent. I think if you look at the continent as a whole, people tend to label it as, Africa is one country. It's 54 countries, each one as diverse as any different country. For example, the differences between Japan and Korea, for example. So, looking to go to business in every country, you have to look at the very specific business needs, what the requirements are, what the market limitations are, etc. So, it just shows that there's a lot of untapped potential, and by creating the African Chamber of Commerce, we hope to get into that. We want to have increased visibility for African businesses. And again, I said that's in and out. So that's both into the African market for Korean-based startups and likewise for African companies and startups into Korea. The other two main parts are advocacy and representation. So a lot of the driving force for the African business, I think you'd mentioned the Korea Africa Foundation. We as a chamber, we've worked with them from their inception. So they were founded in 2017. They were the Korea Africa Korea Africa Foundation at the time, and we've worked with them from the beginning. So held their hand, sort of advised them on ways to implement different strategies, what to look at. Last year we took out 30 companies to Cape Town. If you're heading to South Africa, please pass by Cape Town. It's a wonderful place for trade shows and finding buyers and suppliers for different companies. And then lastly, increased cooperation. I think that speaks for itself. Again, I'll just touch on these very quickly. Again, the Chambers of Commerce, you'll be very well aware of them, is to increase the network. Again, a day like this where we are sharing information, you never know where the next partner comes, you never know where the next opportunity comes. So sharing that information, talking about opportunities, Business Africa, this is where we generate, the next business in 10, 20 years. Business support services, momentum and focus and strength of local business community and source. I think these are just touch points as why the African Chamber of Commerce would be an essential part for the Korean startup market as well. Setting up the chamber, I won't touch on this. This is more just the logistics about it. We've started from sort of March this year to put the chamber together. Obviously, there's a lot of administrative rigmarole to get registered with the Korean Chamber of Commerce, etc. Maybe the one point I can touch on is we are required by the government to have signed letters of consent by African business people who head up African business. So if you are a business owner, sole proprietor, you have a company CEO registered in Korea, or maybe you have a branch office of your African company in Korea. To support that, just to give the company information and a signature to say, we support this initiative. Obviously, that's easier said than done. I think Rizzo earlier we mentioned that getting people to respond via email is not always the best opportunity, and probably face-to-face, WhatsApp, Kakao, LinkedIn, just keep harassing people. But our objective is to have that hopefully up and running and registered at least by the end of this year. Part of that reason is next year, in 2024, the Korean government is hosting the first African summit ever in Korea. Now, to give you some indication, they've invited all 54 heads of state. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It'll probably never happen again in our lifetime. You'll have all 54 heads of African state here. This will be in June next year. What that means is the Korean government is starting to really start focusing on the region. It means they're looking for opportunities, and they see a lot of cooperation points between Korean companies and African companies. So as startups, I think it's a great time to be involved in Africa and to look at the African market. There's a huge amount of opportunity, and we will get into that in some of the later slides. I think from this, I won't touch too much on this. I think the purpose of the African Chamber of Commerce is also to focus on Africa for Africans. A lot of the discussions, whether it's from a political side in Korea, even if it's through the Korea Africa Foundation, is always with a Korean focus. We obviously want to have this more on an African focus. But again, I think the key point is the bilateral portion of it. So in and out between the two is very essential. The low presence of Korean investments in Africa, I think that speaks for itself. Even if we look at the big companies like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, there's no manufacturing facilities really across the continent. So this is an area where even the big size companies, let alone SMEs and small scale size companies, opportunities for them to invest in for the future purposes. I think these I'm not going to touch too much on. I think it's just the vision and objectives of the African Chamber of Commerce. Again, it's very similar to any other Chamber of Commerce that you'll come across in. I will move over to the sort of next part. Maybe I'll stop there. If there are any questions in terms of the South African Chamber of Commerce and what we do, or the African Chamber of Commerce and the goals that we've set in terms of what we look at doing in the future, I'm happy to answer questions now. Otherwise, I'll move on to the sort of second leg in terms of if you're looking at the African market, what to look at from a legal perspective to protect, your interests in your company. So if there are any questions, we can deal with that now. Otherwise, we can do that at the end of the session. Yeah, Rizo.
So at the first or second slide, I saw the FTA with the AFCK FTA. How's that going on in motion, or is it already set? What are the categories of products and services?
So that's a great question. Those are still very initial baseline discussions. So it'll probably take, I'd say, a couple of years at the very least to promote that. But on that point, as mentioned, so with the Africa Summit coming up next year, obviously governments want to show that they've signed MOUs, partnership agreements, economic cooperation agreements. So I think that's an opportunity for African companies and countries especially to springboard of that. I think that's going to create a lot of push in terms of that direction. So who knows, from those discussions there might be sort of an elevated status in terms of it. But for now, it's still a bottom rung. The difficulty is because of the AFCTA at the moment, if Korea wants to sign an FTA with, let's say, an African country, they need to get the signatures of all the other binding members, which again makes it difficult. But at least from a bilateral discussion point, I think there's a lot of opportunity from there. So these I won't touch on. I think we'll then move into the sort of second slide portion, which is the sort of legal portion from investing into Africa. Now again, as I'd mentioned, there are a huge amount of different jurisdictions, each one very specific. And as you can understand, Africa, in terms of geographical size, is absolutely massive. I think you can fit in India, the US, China, and South America into the continent. So from a geographical size, it's just massive. So obviously across that you have, from the south up to the north, different languages, different religions, different cultures. So don't ever think of Africa as a one unit. It's a very independent unit. Oh, sorry. I'll get into the 5 core elements. So what we'll touch on in terms of this, so just the overview of the zonal legal zones. So in Africa, you can basically break it down into 5 zones. You've got north, south, east, west, and the Central African region. And each one is zoned like that because they are similar in terms of their application of law and religion and language in those areas. Second, we'll look at the rule of law index in Africa, and I'll touch on this, why that's important. Then how the African Union plays a part in terms of the structures, the protections that are granted. And then general principles for doing business in Africa. For a startup company, these are parts which you really need to focus on for protection of your investments, to make sure that where you're doing business and the partners that you have are relevant and trustworthy. And then finally, if there are disputes or issues, how to resolve those without having to go through the local courts. So generally, you'll have three different types of laws that will be applicable. One would be local customary law. So often this is not written law, but more sort of from just customs which are implemented on a day-to-day basis. And they often deal with just very generic type of issues like divorces, marriages, succession, estates, etc. You get then Islamic or Sharia law. Again, that would be more prevalent or relevant for North Africa, but very specific, particularly when it comes to financing. So, Islamic financing laws are very different that you might come across other than, financing laws from a US or a UK perspective. And then obviously the traditional Western laws. So your civil code, like the French Korean civil code is very similar, and the common law, which is the UK-based legal systems. Again, I think we'll just touch on more the North African sector. So these are those countries that have adopted the Islamic and Sharia law. Again, this is also due to historical developments across the continent. So obviously North Africa, where there's been a strong French influence, obviously the local laws from the French time are applicable. I think most nations in sub-Saharan Africa are more Commonwealth jurisdictions, so that might be more area where you'd be more comfortable in terms of understanding the investment environment, protections and securities that you have in place. I've done this just for visual, so you'll see basically the red and sort of orange parts are more the traditional common law countries, obviously thereby being more sort of English-based speaking. The green would be more your sort of civil law, French-based countries in terms of application of that, and then the yellow portion, obviously the Islamic financing and Sharia law, which would be more applicable from there. So again, looking at the map, depending on where you want to focus your business or what countries you want to focus your business on, these are points to consider in terms of your legal documentation, the form of your legal entity, contract interpretation, etc. The rule of law index. So one point I want to touch on is from doing a lot of business and investment for Korean companies in particular to Africa, they always come up with the same reason. Well, Africa is it's an unstable environment. Our investment is not safe. There might be a lot of political unrest. The distance is really far. But what I want to show through this rule of law index is it's an index that's put together from professionals, individuals, companies across a number of sectors across the world. And they cover all these 8 different points, which are essential for investment purposes, particularly at startups. So it looks at constraints of governmental power. So, how strong are the government? Are they going to come and take your investment? What type of rules do they have applicable to that? Absence of corruption, I think that's a massive part. I think traditionally in the past, even in Korea in the probably 70s, 80s, there's massive corruption. So these are issues that, over time also change. And I think those mindsets have to change in terms of application of them. Open government, fundamental rights, and then obviously civil justice and criminal justice to make sure that you're served. So what I'll do here is just to highlight from an example. This is a list and just a snapshot of the list. So if you look on the list, you'll see, for example, Rwanda, Namibia, Mauritius, and their global ranking in terms of the rule of law is sort of 42, 45, 45. Why I've highlighted, for example, India, Vietnam, China, these are countries which traditionally Korean companies do a huge amount of investment in. And if you have the perception that Africa is more risk-worthy, I tend to disagree quite strongly on that. Other countries have way more limitations in terms of government influence, corruption, etc. So don't think of Africa as an issue where it's a difficult place to invest or there are risks. Yes, there are always risks, but those risks are inevitable in any country. You can have risks in the US, you can have risks in the UK. Africa is no different, and I think you have to be very objective in the way that you approach it and understand that there are many countries in Africa, particularly because maybe of past prejudices, that countries are actually doing way more than the traditional countries in terms of ensuring that foreign investors in particular are protected and that the investment environment is welcoming for new investment. So I really want to highlight this point in terms of investment into Africa. Again, the AU, I think that's going to play a reasonably important part in terms of intra-Africa trade and protection of the flow of goods, services, import tariffs, etc. across the region. But I think in general, it's going to be a very positive part from that perspective. OHADA, that's a certain set of countries which follows a very specific law, all under the sort of same law, which also makes it easier. So once you're in or doing business within those countries, the same legal principles will apply across the board. Again, I don't want to go through too much of this from a legal perspective, but you know, all African countries like Korea are signatories to the New York Convention. Your investments are protected. You've got fair and equitable treatment, etc. So from a financial perspective, I think there are a lot of risks that you can manage by making sure that all of these check boxes are ticked off when looking to invest into Africa. Again, arbitration centers, if there are issues that are upcoming, are starting to develop quite significantly across the continent, purely because of increase in trade, so hence there's a lot more disputes. So even the arbitration sector, for example, is developing at a high and quite a quick and rapid rate. Maybe these are questions and top 8 questions that I'd say to all our startup companies or big companies looking to invest into whatever country, but particularly Africa as well. You know, what is the legal system? So do you understand what will happen if your contract dispute? How will they interpret that? What will be the implication? The rule of law, as we've mentioned, have a look at that. How safe is it? What is the political situation? What is the economical situation, development, etc. Foreign investor protector laws, I think that's also very important to check and make sure that, you know, if I do go in, can I get my money out? Are there restrictions on it? You know, tax amounts, etc. Maybe local requirements that you need for investment purposes. Again, FTA, BTI, I think those are on a case by case because depending on the G2G discussions, there are different tax rates, benefits that are applicable. If we look, for example, currently with the US and the Inflation Reduction Act, that's made a massive impact in terms of the EV market, the electric vehicle battery and battery market in general. So government to government relationships are always very important to look at in terms of how that impacts the business. Enforcement issues, so if there's an issue, how can I enforce or get my investment out, etc. And then I think the last 2 are quite simple and straightforward in terms of just the general application of legal practical issues and what to consider. I think a very important part too is to make sure your local partners, and I think that's where a Chamber of Commerce, African Chamber of Commerce comes into play. They have the network of partners that are doing business on the ground in Africa. So remember, they want to succeed, you want to succeed, everyone wants to make money. If you find the right partner, you will find a partner for life. I think there's the old African saying that if you want to go, you know, fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's a tradition of African business as well. I think it's a partnership that we look for the long term in terms of walking that road together. I think these I won't touch on. This is more related to South Africa in terms of what it does from a legal perspective. So I won't touch on those. What I could possibly touch on here, just in terms of a South African perspective, from a banking perspective, probably the strongest banking sector across the continent are South African banks. They are, in terms of the world ranking, probably in the top percentile, particularly for financing of local projects. So if you look at the big banks like Standard Bank, Absa Bank, Nedbank, First Rand Bank, they probably finance 60-70% of most of the projects across the continent, particularly sub-Saharan, sort of Central Africa. They have deep pockets, they know the markets, they have the local requirements. So when it comes to financing from that perspective, South Africa is a key area. I think you'd mentioned earlier, Mr. Kim, that South Africa is probably the most comfortable place to business. I would probably tend to agree with that, simply because it can be used as a soft landing. So you go in, you have protections, it's infrastructure is great, banking facilities are great, legal protection, and then you can springboard from there into the rest of Africa or other areas that you look at doing business in. So I think from that perspective, South Africa is very key and essential to the African market, and often seen as the beacon or the lighthouse for African business. I think I'd highlight rank number 1 in the world for auditing and reporting standards in terms of the financial sector. So that includes the US, that includes the UK, Europe. And we all know even most of the financial downturns or financial collapses have been to mismanagement or funding through UK and US banks primarily. So from an African perspective, I think that's a key and critical point for investment in Africa. as I mentioned, these are the banks, and you'll see their coverage there across the African market. So although they're South African banks, they actually call themselves Pan-African banks. So they cover, most of the African market, especially where there's more development, infrastructure, and business and trade. I think what I'll do is then just stop there in terms of discussion points for entry or difficulties of entry into the legal market in Africa. If there are any particular points, we can touch on that now. Otherwise, we get into the last section as to why Africa is an important market from our perspective and what benefits we see from there. So if there's no questions, we'll sort of go into the next one. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. So why Africa? So I'd mentioned earlier in terms of the size, that gives you a visual, and visuals are always amazing to look at. I would never have thought China, Western Europe, India, Argentina, United States all fits into Africa. So that gives you the scale. Now, one thing to consider from that is, yes, when you're looking at projects, you have to look at distances between, let's say you're doing smart farming or mining your minerals. Are there roads? Are there infrastructure? How do we get there? We've had a couple of projects where it's mining projects in Africa, but to take the resource to the port, we then have to build a road as well. We then have to build the electricity pylons. So those are issues that you have to look at and consider why there might be some difficulties in doing business, but also the opportunity. So whenever there's a difficulty, it means somebody has to fill that void or that gap. So always bear that in mind. I think in terms of the increase in terms of the GDP rate, this has just been over the last sort of 5 years. You see a lot of the African regions are the leaders in terms of that. And again, I think this is only going to increase with intra-Africa trade, with the Free Africa Trade Area, and also the increase in the population across those zones. So I think that's a very critical part and an important aspect to consider when looking at Africa for investment. Again, I think we'll move on. I wanted to say from a GDP growth rate, again, that's expected to be the highest across all sectors and all areas of the world. Again, I think this is just indicative in terms of Africa moving in the right direction. One of the points which we can highlight there is the growth of the middle class. So Africa has the youngest population. I think the average age is about 19 or 20 in the world, and an increasing population. So as I mentioned, sort of 2.5 billion by 2050, which means that you have very strong income middle class, very hungry. They have a desire to work. They have a desire to succeed, and obviously a desire for needs for education, good quality food, good products. So I think from that perspective, there's a huge amount to look at from an African market perspective. Again, I think I won't touch on those. I'll probably move into a couple like these. So in terms of ease of business, so I think the average worldwide for starting a business time is 34 days to sort of incorporate, get the company up and running. If you look across the board, most of the African countries are way below that. So for example, Rwanda is 3 days, to get incorporated up and running. So in terms of starting your company and getting your feet on the ground, business or ease of business into the market, it is quite straightforward. Again, largest populations, again, this might be considerations if you're looking at the consumer base and access to consumers, etc. Your sort of 5 main ones, you obviously in Nigeria, we're talking about 200 million, that's, big population. South Africa down there with sort of, it's a bit more than that now, it's probably about 60 million. But that just gives you an insight into, locations across the continent where there are opportunities and where the consumer market is big. Again, growth rates, and this is quite important too to see, where are the growth rates from a population perspective, because that's going to create need and demand, and obviously supply for a lot of different goods. GDPs, I think South Africa and Nigeria are usually 1 and 2, and that obviously varies and depends on different scales on how people calculate it, but just gives you a rough idea in terms of the GDP portion for African countries. Again, this is a good indicator in terms of safety or ease of business, at least from an African continent perspective. So the blue would be sort of more high income and a bit stronger in terms of protections, etc. Whereas the pink and light pink colors would be more areas where I wouldn't say concerning, but maybe not as easy to do business as before. But again, that is a generalization, and it is on a case-by-case basis. So obviously the research required behind it is essential from the startup side. Again, business language, I won't touch on that. We've already been through those. Mobile industry, and I'll probably touch on this point in terms of a couple of key points for investment purposes. So a lot of Africans don't have access to, local markets, ATM machines, etc. So from a mobile perspective, it's the highest penetration rate in the world. Everyone has a mobile app, which means that things like, maybe payments online, studying online, medical applications, etc. Those might be areas of keen interest for people in the startup area. Again, some of you may or may not know, for example, South Africa, which is probably has the best infrastructure within Africa. We currently have critical electricity and water issues. So electricity, we have what they call load shedding, which means that from 8 to 10 hours a day, the power is cut, which means then that industry can't work, the mining houses can't mine and get the minerals and resources out. The pumps can't pump water onto the agriculture. So these are critical areas where there's a lot of opportunity. So for example, over the last 10 years, South Africa has introduced the Renewable Energy Transition Program, which has completely opened and liberalized the solar, wind, battery energy storage systems, and all the subsidiary energy-based systems. So whether you're looking at the transistors, putting in the substations, putting up the electricity lines, etc., these are massive areas where there's a lot of opportunity. Likewise, if you are a startup company that has particular technology that can reduce electricity use, which can reduce consumption, which can be storing, etc., those are areas of key importance. Likewise, from a water perspective, again, water solutions. I think on another one would be agriculture. So Africa obviously has food issues in some regions, and I think in terms of the smart AI farming, that's an area of very keen interest for a lot of the companies, primarily because it saves water, you reduce the land usage, pesticides, etc. So I think there's a lot of opportunity from that side. I think mobile industry, just to give you an idea, you might think that Apple is always the market leader. From an African perspective, it's not. You're still the traditional Nokia system, which would raise a couple of eyebrows. But I think that number is also changing over time. So I think the Samsung and Apples are becoming more and more prevalent in the region. I think from an industry sector, from technology, I think you're right. What Mr. Kim said earlier, South Africa is probably a leader in a lot of those. But then again, countries like Rwanda, surprisingly, Nigeria, there's a lot of things happening across the continent, and I can't actually be, I guess, non-biased and say South Africa is the way to go. I think there's so many African countries out there with different opportunities, uniquenesses in their offerings and services. So please consider and look at Africa as a very broad spectrum and an open spectrum in terms of what you want to do on the continent. Technology industry, I think this is just to show the internet and the download performances, etc. Again, you'd look at countries where you'd have almost zero, and others where you'd have a lot better application in terms of internet speed and so on. Again, these are small issues, but when it comes to doing business, critical considerations to make from that perspective. One thing I wanted to highlight from this is in terms of the energy production. So if we look at Africa around the bottom, in terms of the production, you'll see the sort of orange or yellow line, and the population, which is the green, way below what the requirement is. And if you look at the United Kingdom's energy production, equals that of Africa. So United Kingdom, in terms of their population, Africans' population, you'll see the significant shortage of energy. Again, I highlight this not to show a negative, but to show that these are opportunities that are lying in wait. And if you look at crane companies, for example, the 6 Gencos that you have, all the big ones, SK, Doosan, POSCO, these are areas where they can be very active in terms of investment, but also looking at then maybe their smaller suppliers for the technologies and so on. And that might be an area for interest for startup companies. But I just wanted to highlight that in terms of, the energy sector is a critical one from an African perspective. Again, energy infrastructure, I'm not going to touch too much on that. Kind of speaks for itself, and I can share the slides for your benefit at a later stage. And natural resources, and I think this is one I wanted to touch on as well from an African perspective. It is the continent with the most rich access to minerals and critical minerals across the continent. Now, in the last probably 2 years, there's been a significant change in terms of the focus on Africa. primarily because you've got, for example, I mentioned the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act with the US. You've got the US and China sort of trade wars. So at the moment, China, for example, are restricting and going to give out permits, for example, of export of their graphite. Now, graphite, as you will know, is a critical component of the EV batteries, and Korea is dependent 98% of its graphite supply and production from China. So without that, they need alternatives. And I think Africa is an area of great opportunity from that perspective. Again, there are issues to consider in terms of, you know, distance and shipping and pricing, etc. But in terms of the critical minerals on the continent, there's a massive amount on there. And I think from a Korean perspective and an African perspective, a lot of opportunities that can be uncovered by looking at this. So I think this is an area where there's going to be a lot of development over the coming weeks and months. And already Korea is starting to look at opportunities, signing MOUs with some of the bigger companies on the African market from a mining perspective. So I think that then also means that from that perspective, there are going to be other issues. For example, the rail industry in Africa is not that well developed. So the African Union, by their 2060 agenda, want to connect all the main ports of Africa with high-speed rail, which means that there has to be the infrastructure, the EPC contractors coming in, the rail opportunities. So, for example, a company like Hyundai Rotem with their technologies would be important. To give you an example, Hyundai Rotem also have hydrogen cell technology for their trains. In South Africa, we have an issue with theft of the electric cabling for the train system. So if we then have hydrogen stations to fill, it removes that issue in terms of the theft and the cabling. So there's so much opportunities that we can highlight to you to say there's opportunity. It might look at some points as it's a difficulty, but I see it as an opportunity for investment into the region. I think natural industry, I'm not going to touch too much on that. Again, I think here for me the most important part is just selecting the correct business partner. So we've advised a number of Korean companies that have been burnt on transactions, not only in Africa, but whether that's South America, Australia, the US. You know, make sure that you're vetting the people that you do business with. So, you know, we meet people through opportunities like this, through the chambers of commerce, through our local state departments back in the country. Make sure you spend a little bit of money up front to save you a lot of headache at the end. I think a lot of Korean companies do the reverse. They don't want to spend a little bit to make sure that things are safe and secure. And at the end, there's a lot of issues that come out. So please make sure that when you are doing, you know, looking for business partners, reach out to the contacts. You know, there's a lot of people that are out there that are looking for opportunities. They just don't have the network or opportunity to meet companies. I think I'm going to stop on that point in terms of timing. Maybe for 2 or 3 Q&A if there's anyone that has general questions from an African perspective.
Thanks for your speech and information. I'm Computer School CEO, Jackie. And actually, when I say the same item in the world, I have to reduce the price for the Africa. Basically, I will support the education program to the Nigeria in the future, but I can decide yet for the price. Can you advise about this point?
So pricing is always very difficult in terms of the market, and I guess there's a whole lot of different issues that will be determinant. What I can say from a perspective of Africa is, if we look at a lot of currency exchange, I'll take, let's say, data centers, for example. For South Africa is very well suited. There's well-educated people that can run the data center. But with currency differences, it'll be half the price of employing someone there than you might have, for example, in America. So there's a spin-off between the currency and amount which is sort of relevant for the labor costs. So labor costs in terms of Africa in general is way less than, for example, Korea. So your, let's say, minimum wage in Korea would be, I think, 3,000, I'm not sure of the exact amount. But in Africa, it'll be cheaper in terms of the currency exchange as well. So that's where you can also find the, I guess, the balance of debt, so to say, in terms of, you know, what you might have to charge at a lower rate. But again, it's very industry specific, so I can't be 100% spot on in terms of that. But I think those are issues that will make a difference. Likewise, if it's new ventures in new countries, governments will also be looking to offer a lot of financial support in terms of tax rebates, tax benefits, maybe special economic zones where those educational facilities will be set up, which means that maybe your overhead costs will be a lot less than what they might be where you're setting up in a traditional market for the education purpose.
One general question about not just investing, but actually having a money transfer out of Africa. There has been an issue with, dollar repository is being shortage in Africa. So how do you protect, investment from coming into Africa and also out of Africa?
So that's a good question, and maybe that's how we can touch on what the bank side mentioned. So depending on the size of the investment, but I'm generally speaking, it's probably a more significant investment from that perspective. What often they do then is do the currency swap with the local South African bank. So they're willing to hedge the risk. So for example, Absa, Standard Bank, Nedbank, because they're so involved in the African market for the last 100 years and they have operations in probably 20 or 30 of the African countries, they're willing to accept that currency risk. So what they'll do is they might then issue the local currency, but take the risk and hedge the bet on the currency exchange. So there's ways and means to get around that, but I think the banks themselves, the local banks, and I mentioned the South African ones because they are primarily the ones which do a lot of those financing, hedge that bet and they take the risk because they understand the market. So that would be a good way to at least hedge that perspective from that currency difference which you might lose out on.
Well, thank you so much for your helpful presentation. And my question is, you listed all the legal risk, in Africa, but also I'm curious about the geopolitical risk in general. I mean, right now the world is a pretty unstable place. Ukraine, Israel, I don't know, Taiwan and US-China relationship and stuff like that. Do you see any macro geopolitical risks that could affect Africa in the near future? What are your personal worries, for example, just throughout the continent?
Phew, that's a really tough question. I think one can also look at certain African countries to say, well, is there political instability? I'd say in a lot of African countries, there wouldn't be, simply because the ruling party has been in there for 10, 15, 20 years, which means that you're most likely to have the same policies in place. But there are always the risks where things come into play where there are differences or parties overthrowing. But I don't think that's any different from any other jurisdiction, and that's probably the key point to take away. We have issues in the US, we have European issues, and traditional areas where you might not have seen that type of difficulty. So it's hard to gauge, but I would say from a personal perspective, I think Africa in general is reasonably stable, particularly the Southern African region, the sub-Saharan, generally very democratic, very transparent. And I do think even the traditional countries where there have been past issues, let's take Rwanda, for example, genocide there, probably late 90s, between the Hutsi and the Tutsi. They now have probably one of the strongest government implementations and ease of benefit for foreign investors into the country. So that country has gone from almost devastation to be something to be proud of from an African perspective. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, but I don't see a long-term general difficulty from a macro perspective on that.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, due to the time constraint, now we have to have a 5 minute to wrap up the stage and for you guys to network a bit. So meanwhile, if you have any personal question, feel free to ask Timothy. And thank you for attending. See you in 3:10. We have 6 minutes to relax. Thank you. 네. 다음 세션 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 다음 세션을 위해서 착석해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. So now we're going to start our next session. Please grab a seat. It will be one of the most interesting session of this year I have ever pulled. 네, 오늘 지금 세션은 저희가 굉장히 내년에 관심 있게 저희가 볼 수 있을 듯한, 그리고 최근에 8월 발표된 K 스타트업 방향, 네, 글로벌 그 정책 그리고 그 새로운 폴리시에 대해서 논의해 볼 텐데요. 굉장히 중요한 게스트분을 모셨습니다. 스피커로. 네, 저희 그 한국에서 가장 오래된 그리고 가장 큰 외국인 창업가 커뮤니티를 운영하고 계시는, 또 그리고 다방면에서 외국인 창업 생태계를 위해서 힘써주고 계시는 마르타 알리나 먼저 무대로 모시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 환영해 주십시오. So if you're a foreigner in Korea, you would definitely know Marta. 여기 앉아주시면 돼요. 네, 그리고 또 저희 이번 패널에 함께해 주실 한국 엑셀러레이터 협회 공성현 사무국장님 모시도록 하겠습니다. 네, 이번 세션은 대체로 한국어로 진행을 하고 중간중간 이렇게 통역을 좀 진행하도록 하겠습니다. So this session we're going to be mainly running it in Korean, and also I'll be jumping in as a translator here and there, so majority can have an understanding about next year's picture. Okay. So Marta, 한번 자기소개 한 번만 더 부탁해 주세요.
네, 안녕하세요. 저 한국 스타트업 무대에서 여러 가지 역할을 하는 마르타입니다. 저 원래 폴란드 출신이고 한국에서 산지 15년 넘었고 지금은 서울 스타트업스라는 국제 스타트업 커뮤니티 운영하고 있습니다. 외국인뿐만 아니라 그 한국인도 편하게 가입할 수 있는 그 커뮤니티입니다. 그것뿐만 아니라 저희 그 Start to Group, 원래 German Entrepreneurship라는 그 기업에 그 한국 정관 있고, 그리고 마지막으로 지금 부산에서 South Ventures라는 투자 펀드랑 엑셀러레이터 운영하고 있습니다. 반갑습니다.
So Marta is a founder of a Seoul startup, which is foreigner and also Korean-friendly startup community. It's openly joinable. She's been staying in Korea for over 15 years now, working with the German Accelerator and also the South Ventures in Busan. So please stay tuned. 국장님.
네, 반갑습니다. 저는 한국 엑셀러레이터 협회의 사무국장으로 있는 공성현이라고 합니다. 저희 협회는 그 등록된 창업 기획자 엑셀러레이터라고 하는 분들이 참여하는 어소시에이션이고요. 크로스보더 이코시스템 포럼을 그 저희 협회가 기획하고 지금 포레인 인터프런서 클럽이랑 같이 운영을 하고 있습니다. 협회에서 왜 이런 걸 하냐라고 종종 이제 묻고 있긴 한데 사실 그 많이 아는 글로벌라이즈된 마켓들은 저희가 굳이 찾아다니지 않더라도 정보들이 많습니다. 근데 그렇지 않은 시장, 특히 뭐 아프리카나 혹은 뭐 에스토니아나 여러 숨겨져 있는 창업 생태계가 잘 갖춰져 있지만 알려지지 않은 그런 스타트업 이코시스템들이 알기 어려운 요즘 같은 상황에 저희가 나서서 그런 걸 좀 알려주기도 하고, 특히 인앤아웃이 자유로운 최근의 이 스타트업 환경에 한국에서 굉장히 힘들게 어렵게 창업하고 비즈니스를 이어가는 그 외국인 스타트업들 많습니다. 우리나라의 스타트업들 외국 진출할 때야 도움 많이 받을 수 있는데 외국의 스타트업들이 한국에 들어오셨을 때 누가 어떻게 도움을 받아야 되냐, 거기에 좀 더 깊이 한번 논의도 하고 어떤 문제들이 있는지 한번 짚어보자, 그런 의도에서 이 빌더스 포럼을 만들었고요. 두 번째이긴 하지만 그래도 의미 있게 지금 잘 가고 있는 것 같습니다. 내년까지 꾸준히 이어져서 정말 많은 이슈들을 저희가 이런 기회에 끄집어내서 문제가 있다라는 걸 좀 알리고 같이 조금씩 바꿔나가는 변화하는 창업 생태계 만들고자 열심히 노력하고 있습니다. 고맙습니다.
So Shane is from Korea Accelerators Association, which is a bundle of accelerators within Korea to address their benefits and interests as a group and to make the common voice of the accelerators in Korea and the startup ecosystem. And now it has been the second cross-border ecosystem builders forum along with Shane and me. We're trying to introduce the unique startup ecosystems around the world, like common ones we can easily find the information, but uncommon ecosystems is very tough to find. So that's what we've been working on, and also to make much more foreigner and global friendly in an outbound wise. Ecosystem in Korea is our main goal. So please help us to proceed with this movement. Okay. 네. 자, 그럼 첫 번째 질문이 있습니다. 마라타는 이제 한국에서 생활도 이제 오래 하고 이 창업 생태계에 오래 있으셨잖아요. 그 처음 왔을 때의 생태계와 지금 한국 생태계 어떤 게 달라졌다고 이렇게 러프하게 느끼시는지.
제가 한국 스타트업 무대에 들어온 지 약 8년 정도 됐는데 그때보다는 제 생각에는 아무 것보다는 뭐 커뮤니티 훨씬 더 많이 활성되고 있고 커뮤니티 스타트업 창업자들이 서로 조금 도와주고 있고 서로 커뮤니케이션 소통하면서 그 선배 후배들 위해 여러 가지 노력하고 있는 것을 알게 됐는데요. 그것뿐만 아니라 조금씩 옛날보다는 외국인 창업자 그 성공 케이스가 보이고 있습니다. 최근에 한 기업이 뭐 팁스를 그 유지됐고 어떤 다른 기업이 지금 해외에서도 성공적으로 활동하고 있는데 그래서 그런 외국인 창업자 위에 그 현황이 조금씩 발전되고 있는 것을 알고 있습니다. 하지만 아직도 부족한 것이 많이 있지 않을까 고민하고 있습니다.
So the biggest difference between the past and now would be the function of communities. We're having much more communication going on in between the ecosystem players. And also, most of all, we're seeing the increasing number of foreign entrepreneurial status in Korea. One of them has been selected as a TIPS invested company and also going very globally. But still, we have lots of room for improvements. 네, 그러면 국장님이 보시기에는 처음에 이렇게 생태계에 들어오셨을 때와 지금 한국 스타트업 생태계 전체가 좀 어떻게 변화하고 있는 것 같으세요?
사실 이제 한국만큼 굉장히 보수적인 창업 생태계나 경제 생태계가 갖춰진 곳이 없는 것 같아요. 우리나라의 스타트업이 아웃바운드로 갈 때는 굉장히 많은 지원을 해줍니다. 근데 인바운드에 대해서는 저도 이번에 이 리소님하고 이런 걸 하면서 이제서야 눈을 뜨게 됐는데 그 정도로 저희 주변에 제 주변에 그런 정보나 혹은 그런 니즈를 가진 사람들이 많이 찾아보기 힘들었던 혹은 제가 별로 거의 관심이 없었던 상황이었던 것 같아요. 근데 지금 이제 이런 걸 운영하면서 눈을 떠보니 수많은 가능성 있는 스타트업들 특히 외국인 창업가들이 주변에 있었고 이분들의 도움을 줄 만한 충분한 인프라가 있음에도 불구하고 우리나라의 이런 정책들이 거기에 프렌들리하지 못하고 있는 거 아닌가라는 생각을 많이 하고 있습니다. 여전히 그러니까 그 걸음마 단계 정도 수준이고 우리 특히 투자자들 관점에서는 더더욱 이런 거에 좀 오픈 마인드가 돼야 되는데 좀 변화가 필요하다라는 그런 위기감을 느끼고 있습니다.
So, as Shane has been the early comer of the startup ecosystem, what he has recognized is that South Korea is one of the most conservative startup ecosystems around the world. And for the outbound and globalization of local companies, we have lots of supports going on. But other way around, when it comes to an inbound startups coming from abroad to Korea, Shane started to recognize there were lots of lacking supports in that area, which we're trying to evolve, but still has a lot of room for improvements. And especially on the investor perspective, we should be also very aware about these kind of opportunities and very unique talents and with the high potential startups coming from abroad to Korea. So I'm going to move on to the next question. 그래서 저희가 새로운 이런 인프라도 구축이 잘 돼가고 있고 생태계가 어느 정도 성숙한 상황에서 그 요번에 8월 30일 날 그 간담회 다녀오시고 그 K-스타트업 정책에 대해서 이제 보고 오셨잖아요. 그 전반적인 그 정책에 대한 느낌이 어떠세요? 이렇게 좀 방향성이나 이런 게?
솔직히 답변 드릴까요?
네, 솔직하게. 네.
저 일단은 8월에 기대가 없었습니다. 솔직히 말씀드리면 저 보통 정치원들이 말 많이 하고 예쁘게 말 많이 하지만 확실히 액션이 없습니다. 그래서 제가 기대 많이 안 했는데 지금은 최근에 중기부 여러 가지 활동을 보면 지금 내년 기획을 활동을 보면 확실히 뭐가 바뀔 수 있는 것으로 알게 됐는데요. 그래서 아직도 안전하게 다 보고 있는데 근데 조금씩 뭔가 희망적으로 좀 생각하고 있습니다. 네, 네.
So when Marta went to the roundtable session with the former Blue House with the president, right? Not the former one, but the current one. Yeah, and when she was stepping into that room, she was not really expecting with a lot of hopes that there is going to be such a big changes. But what she recognized these days is that starting from Minister of SME, some of the practical movements are actually happening to make the improvements, right? So 국장님이랑은 사실 이 정책에 대해서 한 번씩 얘기를 많이 나눠봤었는데 국장님 생각에는 지금 현재 이런 한국 기업의 글로벌 진출이나 해외 기업의 한국 진출에 대해서 이 정책안이 가지고 있는 방향성이 실현 가능성이 이제 얼마나 있고 어떤 부분들이 좀 보완되면 좋을지 싶은 게 있으셨나요?
사실 이번에 그 중기부에서 정책안을 발표했을 때 굉장히 무시무시한 걸 던지니 기대해 주세요라고 초반에 이제 엄청 이렇게 블럼핑을 했습니다. 그래서 던진 걸 보니 상당히 무시무시한 것이더라고요. 실제 그 내용만 봐서는. 그러니까 저렇게 자신만만하게 이야기할 만도 했구나라고 느껴지는데 더 무시무시하게 느껴지는 건 도대체 누가 이걸 하지라는 겁니다. 사실상 아젠다를 던져놓고 크게 줄게 이렇게 하겠습니다, 저렇게 하겠습니다로 큰 꼭지는 던졌는데 그럼 그 밑에 하위 조직들, 실행해야 되는 조직은 저걸 이해하고 갈 수 있을까라는 생각이 더 크게 들었습니다. 비자 문제 그리고 뭐 여러 기관들이 글로벌라이즈한 프로젝트를 운영하겠다. 그러면 그 하위단에 따라가는 그 휴먼 리소스 채워져야 되고 거기에 붙여지는 여러 행정 기반들이 갖춰져야 되는데 그걸 내년에 당장 어떻게 라는 거죠. 그러니까 뭐 조금씩 하고는 있겠지만 그렇게 세게 던져서 우리나라 창업 정책을 이제 확실히 바꾸겠습니다라고 던질 때는 그럼 이제 어떤 스텝 바이 스텝으로 가겠습니다도 같이 따라와 줬으면 좋지 않을까라는 생각이 들었는데 우선은 뭐 전체적 방향 제시는 확실히 무시무시했다라는 생각은 듭니다.
So when before the roundtable session, the Minister of SME told Shane that we're going to be dropping something big. So just look forward, right? Stay tuned. And then he wasn't really expecting anything, but when he first saw the agenda, he was like, "Whoa, they were actually very serious about this topic." And yes, they have big dreams. It has a very ambitious goals, but Shane's concern is that who's going to be operating it? Who's going to make the ends meet? Also, especially like the visa issues, is we need lots of expertise, lots of professionals, and multiple different institutions, administration, collaborating together to make these things work. And just Ministry of SME didn't seem to have that really key point on how to make this work. 그래서 이 질문을 이어서 마르타한테 여쭤보고 싶은 거는 이제 오아시스 프로그램 운영도 많이 하시잖아요. 그리고 오아시스 프로그램 운영하시다 보면은 분명히 그 안에도 이제 창업 비자가 이렇게 어려워도 되나 쉬워도 되나 이런 생각도 있으실 거고 이번 정책 안에서도 이제 E7, D8, D2 해가지고 그 비자들에 대해서 완화를 하겠다라고 했을 때 가장 빠르게 그 완화돼야 되는 비자의 어떤 그 배리어 그런 것들이 어떤 게 있을지 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
제 생각에는 일단은 문제가 중위부에서 되게 그 비자에 대한 되게 그 명확하게 기회가 갖고 있는데요. 근데 그 오히려 조립국 사무소에서 그거를 어떻게 반응하면 되는지 아직도 잘 모르잖아요. 첫 번째는 조립국 사무소에서 스타트업 뭔지 모르는 공무원들이 아직 많습니다. 그래서 그분들이 그 비자를 비자를 그거 진행하면 비자를 그 케이스를 진행하면 보통을 그 어떻게 판단하면 되는지 그 사람이 그 비자를 받으면 되는지 안 되는지 쉽게 평가할 수 없는데요. 그거를 기준이 없습니다. 그 기준이도 없고 지식이도 없습니다. 그래서 그거로 제일 큰 문제가 있다고 생각하고 있는데요. 왜냐하면 그 본부적으로 아직도 창업 스타트업 생태계에 대해 이해성이 아직 낮습니다.
So Ministry of SME has plannings, agendas about these visas, but immigration admins they have no idea what startup is, and they don't know how to react towards these kind of visa conditions. So still we have to make overall understanding about startup itself and also like what startup visa is to make these things practically work.
하나를 추가해도 돼요? 제
Yes, please.
생각에는 여기 이 정책에서 정기부에서 정책이 되게 중요하지만 그것보다는 일반 시민들의 일반 공무원들의 사고 방식이 바꾸는 것이 더 훨씬 더 중요합니다. 근데 그거는 내년까지 할 수 없는데 이거를 뭐 5년, 10년 정도 걸릴 수도 있겠습니다.
So what we should change fundamentally is the mindset of the civilians and also the public offices, the way towards their visioning these kind of issues on the startups and foreigners, etc. 네.
지금 공무원들이 저 최근에 제가 개인적으로도 비자를 갖고 있잖아요. 여기 한국에서요. 그래서 최근에 비자를 연장했을 때는 저기 공무원이 저한테 스타트업이 뭐냐고 물어봤어요.
So the question that Derek gave was like, do you really believe the public officers are actually changing throughout past 8 years? And when Marta recently went for the immigration, they said, what is startup? As a question. So still, they will be saying like not changing that much. Okay. 그렇다면은 이제 비자도 하나의 외국인 창업가들에게 문제겠지만 그 다음 제가 봤을 때 가장 흔한 문제점은 투자인 것 같아요. 네, 펀딩 문제가 가장 큰 것 같은데 우선은 협회 차원에서는 외국인 창업자들한테 투자를 하는 거에 가장 큰 허들이 뭐라고 좀 느껴지시는지 궁금합니다.
사실 이제 그 펀딩 이슈에서는 외국인 창업가든 한국인 창업가든 어차피 창업이라고 하는 세션, 그러니까 스타트업이라고 하는 그 기대 가치에 반해서 투자를 하는 거니까 문제는 없다고 봐요. 근데 그 펀드레이징 하는 인베스터들이 판단하는 스타트업의 기준에 외국인이라고 하는 잣대가 조금은 이렇게 좀 더 레벨이 높게 느껴지는, 그래서 우리나라의 많은 정책들 중에 특히 이제 중기부에서 하는 정책 중에 스타트업을 평가하거나 투자의 영역에서 볼 때 과연 투자자가 전문적으로 볼 수 있느냐, 혹은 전문적으로 그들을 코칭하고 리딩할 수 있느냐의 영역이 있을 텐데, 저는 이제 투자자가 투자로서 들어가는 것도 물론 아주 세밀하게 봐야 되는 거긴 한데, 우리가 하고 있는 외국인 지원하는 프로젝트에 전문가라고 참여하는 분들이 정말 전문성 있게 외국인들을 육성하거나 외국인 창업가들에게 창업의 방향성을 제시하거나, 아니면 한국 스타트업이 아웃바운드로 갈 때 그들에게 좋은 방향성을 제시해 줄 수 있는 그런 전문성 있는 분들인가에 먼저 한번 고민을 해야 되지 않나, 전문가의 전문가적 판단을 한번 좀 깊이 한번 고려해야 되지 않나라는 생각이 들었습니다.
So the startup itself is fundamentally difficult to get fundraised, whether they're Korean or foreigners, and it's just regardless of the fact that they're foreigners or Korean, startup itself is difficult to be funded. But when we get to have another layer of a condition saying it's a foreign entrepreneur, foreign founder in the team, that kind of level ups the game's difficulty, right? So what we have to see is that especially these funding programs from Ministry of SMEs or even at the private sessions, do we have the expertise to properly evaluate foreign entrepreneurs, foreign startups, and also even to mentor or lead them towards the next level of their entrepreneurial journey? Do we have the expertise? That will be the question of Shane, right? 그렇다면 이제 마르타가 봤을 때 그 지금 현재 정책에서 그 인바운드뿐만 아니라 글로벌 진출에서도 다루고 있잖아요. 그 글로벌 진출 정책이 이제 뭐 30% 이상의 한국인 지분 참여라든지 아니면 한국인이 직접 해외에 이렇게 기업을 이렇게 설립한다든지 했을 때 저는 개인적으로 이거는 악용될 수 있는 방법들이 너무 많을 것 같다. 아니면은 너무 그 컨디션들이 좀 배려가 낮다라는 생각이 저는 많이 들었었는데 그런 부분에서는 어떻게 느끼셨어요?
저도 비슷하게 생각하고 있습니다. 솔직히 말씀드리면 제 생각에는 이번에는 이 정책에 정부에서 너무 오버했어요. 오버했는데요. 너무 많이 주는데요. 원래 한국 정부가 다른 나라보다는 스타트업들이 너무 많이 지원하고 있고 그 때문에 스타트업 커뮤니티, 스타트업 서로 지원할 수 있는 그 자체가 없습니다. 왜냐하면 계속 언제든지 정부에서 뭐 지원금이나 뭐 멘토링 뭐 등등 여러 가지건 계속 받을 수 있는데요. 근데 이번에는 제 생각에는 너무 말씀하신 대로 악용 케이스가 많을 것 같습니다. 그리고 좀 위험해요.
So I was talking there will be lots of loopholes or the side way arounds we can leverage these government's good deeds into a very wrong sideways. And Malta literally agreed upon it. And I just want to extend my question towards that. 그럼 조금만 거기서 들어간다면은 현재 정책에서 가장 현실적으로 이거는 정말 가장 효과가 있겠다. 예를 들면은 외국인 탤런트와의 어떤 그 기술 교류 프로그램이라든지 외국인 창업자에 대한 프로그램 운영, 비자 뭐 낮추는 거, 그리고 또 한국 기업의 해외 진출에 대한 지원, 이런 여러 정책을 봤을 때 가장 인상 깊었던 정책 라인은 어떤 거였어요?
저는 개인적으로 사실은 그 인바운드 아웃바운드 정책보다는 그 지역 활성화 관련 정책을 많이 기대했습니다. 근데 생각하다 보니 저기 아까 말씀드린 대로 말 많이 있는데 확실히 액션 포인트 없습니다. 그래서 제가 걱정하는 거 지금 사는 부산에서 부산이 제가 최근에 그 토론회 저기 공무원들한테 했는데요. 부산 is not good for startups. 그 지금 그 지역에서 스타트업 생태계에 별로 좋지 않고 스타트업 위에 되게 노력 많이 필요하다고 생각하고 있습니다. 근데 지금 정책을 보면 그런 것이 없습니다. 오히려 제 생각에는 그 교직 관련 그 스타트업 외국인 그 인재가 한국 스타트업에서 그 고용에 관련 정책이 되게 희망적인 것 같은데요. 왜냐하면 아시는지 모르겠지만 지금 한국 스타트업들한테 외국인 탤런트를 고용하는 것이 쉽지 않습니다. 그거 미리 뭐 매출액도 있어야 하고 최소 한국인 정직원 5명 있어야 하는데요. 그래서 그거를 5명이라면 뭐 스타트업이 되게 큰 기업이라고 생각하면 되는데요. 그래서 지금 그거를 조금 불리면 제 생각에는 한국 스타트업들한테 되게 큰 기회가 생길 수도 있겠다고요.
So I was asking what would be the most interesting line from the next year's political agenda, like a regulatory agenda for the support programs. And what Marta mentioned is that these most interesting part would be about the talent acquisition part of foreign talents for the South Korean startups, because currently for South Korean startups to employ foreign employees, they have to have at least 5 regular employees in Korea to employ new foreign talents. And it's not only happening in Busan or in Seoul, Korea as a nationwide. We're having this similar issues with all the startups, and this talent acquisition part could be something very impactful. 그렇다면은 이제 국장님이 보시기에는 이 정책적으로 이런 것들을 저희가 만약에 제안을 하고 싶다면 그럼 어떤 방향으로 이런 것들을 접근을 하는 게 좋을까요?
정부에서 내년 혹은 차기 정책을 정할 때 보통 이제 정부의 입안을 맡고 있는 실무단 사무관들이 대부분 다 위에서 이제 야 내년에 뭐 할지 알아내 뭐 그려봐라고 하면 서랍을 열어서 가장 옛날 것들을 뒤져서 그 중에 키워드를 하나씩 넣으면 괜찮을 만한 것들을 찾아서 라인업을 시키는데 이번 정책이 고 비슷했습니다. 그러니까 수많은 이 그 민원거리들 중에 글로벌 키워드 넣었을 때 적절히 맞는 게 뭐가 있을까? 뭐 해외 진출할 때 뭐 지분율 뭐 보완해 달라. 글로벌 청년 창화상을 이렇게 만들어달라. 옛날부터 있었던 얘기 그런 것들을 이제 붙여서 만들었는데 저는 사실 해외 스타트업들이 한국을 찾는 이유 중에 하나가 굉장히 좀 K 스타트업에 대한 뭐 기대치도 있겠지만 테크놀로지 베이스하게, 그러니까 기술 기반한 스타트업들이 많이 성장할 수 있는 좋은 환경이다라는 거에 좀 믿음이 있거든요. 그런 거를 믿고 들어온다고 생각을 하거든요. 한국의 출연연들이 한 60여 개 있습니다. 정부의 돈을 받아서 운영되는 출연연들. 출연연들의 기술을 이전받거나 기술에 도움받아서 창업을 하고 있는 곳은 거의 100%가 한국 스타트업들입니다. 해외 특히 외국인 창업자가 한국에 와서 출연연의 기술을 도움받거나 기술 이전 받은 적이 거의 없습니다. 근데 출연연의 하나의 미션은 본인의 기술을 해외에 파는 게 미션입니다. 글로벌 라이센스 아웃을 하기 위해서 전문가들이 붙어서 열심히 포장해서 해외에 뭣도 모르는 기업들한테 막 팔고 있습니다. 왜 한국에서 창업하려고 하는 포린 스타트업 창업가들한테 왜 이걸 연결 안 시키지? 그 문제에 아무도 답을 못 하고 있습니다. 관심이 별로 없다는 거죠. 근데 충분한 그런 니즈가 있을 텐데 그걸 연결시켜서 한국의 딥테크 스타트업들, 외국인 창업가이면서 딥테크 기반의 창업을 이어가는 그런 스타트업들이 많이 생겨서 질 높은 창업 생태계를 만드는 게 빨리 할 수 있고 정말 중요한 일이지 않을까라는 생각을 해봤습니다.
시장에서의 관심을 먼저 이끌어내야지 이제 정책도.
그렇죠. 그러니까 인바운드로 들어오는 외국인 스타트업 입장에서는 한국에 와서 좋은 기술로 창업을 하고 싶겠죠. 그리고 거기에 R&D라고 하는 게 잘 받쳐준다 그러면 한국의 스타트업과 똑같이 여기서 창업을 해서 뭔가 여러 가지 시도를 할 수 있는 거죠. 근데 그게 없이 그냥 비자 열어줄게, 교육시켜줄게, 뭐 아주 소프트웨어한 것들만 제공받고 그냥 그렇게 몇 년 있다가 또 사라지고 하는 게 일상다반사이잖아요. 결국 우리가 잘하는 기술적 역량들이 이제 뒷받침되어 주면 좋겠다는 거죠.
So to briefly translate what Shane mentioned is that if there's a Ministry of the Economy or Ministry of SME is like saying let's set up next year's agenda, then the practical part of the team will be, you know, looking down their drawers and see what we had in common in the past. So they're looking for the oldest complaints to the earliest, and then try to find the right paper where they can fill in the keyword global and anything that would make the story work. And the reason is because they're not really interested. So in Korea, for example, we have about 60 government-funded institutions. Those are handling technologies and IPs. Those are focused, and their mission is globalizing these IPs and selling these licenses outside the country. But there is rarely, almost zero case that these technologies owned by 60 different government-funded institutions that has been implemented to the foreign startups or has been shared with the foreign entities. So when the foreign startups are coming into Korea, most of their key points would be the technological maturity the Korean startup ecosystem has. But ironically, we don't really allow the access, these missions and needs in the market. And once we make these kind of awareness, and when we start to match these kind of needs, then the government will start to be aware and trying to implement these kind of regulatory improvements within the ecosystem. 그렇다면 말타한테 이건 정책과는 조금 이렇게 떨어진 personal question일 수 있는데 그 어떤 게 이 말타를 동기부여를 이렇게 계속 스타트업 생태계의 개선을 위해서 그 동기부여를 해주는지 저는 항상 너무 궁금했었거든요. 이런 정책 같은 거를 보면서도, 그리고 항상 이런 그 간담회도 또 출석하시고 그 부산시에서 되게 활동을 활발하게 하시는데 어떤 게 그 메인 모티브이신 것 같아요? 한국에서 특히 이렇게 하시게 되는.
저는 그 서울 스타트업스로
네.
서울 스타트업스라고 하면 저는 그 외국인 창업자, 외국인 스타트업 관계자 담당자로 그 나오고 있고 그분들의 목소리로 그 공무원들한테 그 뭐 부산시나 뭐 그 중기부한테 계속 전달하고 메시지를 전달하고 있습니다. 그래서 감담회 나오기 전에 저는 항상 저희 서울 스타트업 커뮤니티를 물어보는데요. 이번에 감담회에서 이런 주제가 있는데 너들이 지금 어떤 얘기 하고 싶냐? 그 공무원들한테 뭐 전달하고 싶은 얘기가 뭐냐고 계속 물어보는데 그 얘기 다 모이고 그 의견을 다 모이고 그 제가 전달합니다.
그러면 그 가장 모이는 그 8년 동안 변치 않고 계속 있는 그 아젠다나 컴플레인은 어떤 거 같으세요? 네.
제일 큰 컴플레인이 그 외국인 창업자 그 투자 유지 제일 어렵다고 그 얘기 많이 듣고 있고, 그리고 그 전체 인프라가 다 한국어밖에 안 돼서 그래서 그 한국어를 조금 해도 근데 뭐 요청하게 못하는 외국인들한테 되게 그거 내비게이션이 엄청 어렵잖아요. 그래서 그것 때문에 그 여러 가지 정부 지원 사업에 그 지원하는 것이 너무 어렵고, 그 필요한 뭐 R&D나 뭐 사업화 관련 그 자원금 받는 것이 되게 그 문제가 많이 발생하고 있다고 들었는데요.
So Marta has been motivated and as very active to make the voice representative for the foreign entrepreneurs in Korea and report it back to the public officers in Busan City or Ministry of SME and all the related institutions that Marta can reach out to, especially before these kind of roundtable we happened on the August. And I was asking what would be the most common complaints that we get to experience would be number one, fundraising for the foreign entrepreneurs. And number two would be the language barriers. So I think language barriers is kind of common thing, but when I get to work with Shane, I get to see different accelerators who has a perfect English as well. So I want to ask a question to Shane. 그렇다면 국장님 보시기에 가장 이런 외국인 창업자들한테 관심을 가지고 접근하시려는 액셀러레이터 분들이 어떤 분들이 이렇게 있으실까요?
사실 이제 외국인 창업자들이라고 해서 스타트업의 씬에서 크게 다르진 않는데 중요한 건 글로벌라이즈가 가능하냐 아니냐. 아직 기본적으로 랭귀지나 혹은 비즈니스 마인드가 글로벌에 가깝게 접근하고 있느냐 아니냐를 봤을 때 외국인 창업가가 있는 스타트업이 훨씬 더 가능성 높게 보입니다. 근데 그게 비즈니스적 영역이나 혹은 그 가지고 있는 기술적인 영역에서 다른 스타트업과 비교해서 좀 더 뛰어나면 당연히 그렇게 보겠는데 아직까지 우리나라의 외국인 창업가들이 들어와서 하고 있는 비즈니스 대부분은 약간 좀 그 커머디티한 커머셜한 쪽에 가까워서 이게 그 한국의 많은 스타트업 씬에 있는 기술적으로 경쟁력 있다라고 보여지는 여러 이 창업가들하고 좀 비교가 되는 건 사실인 것 같아요. 그리고 한국 액셀러레이터들이 관점에서 봤을 때 결국 투자하고 난 이후에 국내 시장이 아니라 해외 시장에서 클 수 있는 제목이 돼야 되는데 그럴 거면 굉장히 다양한 서포팅 채널을 보유하고 있어야겠죠. 제가 이렇게 희망적으로 보는 건 지금 이제 액셀러레이터들이 조금씩 그런 거에 접근을 하고 있습니다. 그리고 KSGC 프로그램도 액셀러레이터가 참여하고 있고 국내 많은 이 그 창업가를 양성하는 프로젝트에 액셀러레이터 참여하는데 그 수가 많아지고 있어서 결국에 글로벌에 가능한 스타트업을 발굴하는 데 더 집중을 하고 있는 형태가 되고 있어서 기대가 많이 큰 편이긴 합니다.
So what Shane was mentioning was that yes, we do have lots of interest on the foreigner included entrepreneurial teams like startups that has much more high possibility to expand globally, which will be the best practice for accelerator to invest in. So although, however, like even though there are like foreign entrepreneurs in the team or foreigner-led startup, most of their domains in the market are highly focused on the commercial side of it. Nothing that is tech-driven or like 10x types of businesses. So if they could address those kind of edges to the accelerators, I believe they would definitely show the interest. Also, there are certain movements of accelerators in the market who like to be prepared for these kind of global ready startups in Korea. So while mentioning KSGC 같은 경우도 이미 인바운드 프로그램으로 있고 말타도 KSGC 출신이 있잖아요.
출신 아니고 제가
그
옛날에 프로그램 매니저.
네, 프로그램 매니저로서 있었고 지금 정책에서도 인바운드 프로그램 활성화를 하겠다라고 하고 되게 대략적으로만 얘기하고 그 KSCC에도 있었고 오아시스도 운영해 보시면서 인바운드에 대해서 완전히 도가 트셨을 것 같아요. 근데 거기서 가장 많이 한국 기관들 쪽에서 간과하고 있거나 공통으로 발생하고 있는 문제들은 어떤 게 있을까요? 이렇게 언어뿐만 아니라 그냥
프로그램 관련 거.
네.
우선이 내년부터 K-스타트업 그랜드 챌린지 자체가 아주 많이 바뀔 예정입니다. 그 우리 아는 K-스타트업 그랜드 챌린지 없어질 예정입니다. 네, 그거로 첫 번째 있고 두 번째는 K-스타트업 그랜드 챌린지 같은 경우에는 제 생각에는 제일 큰 문제가 공무원들이 운영하는 프로그램입니다. 확실히 액셀러레이터들이 운영하는 프로그램이 아니고 그 공무원들이 운영하는 프로그램인데요. 그래서 그 프로그램이 그 액셀러레이터 프로그램 아니고 사실은 학생 교환 프로그램 같게 운영하게 되었습니다. 그 때문에 여러 가지 아시다시피 여러 가지 큰 이슈가 나타났고 그 법률 관련 이슈가 더 많이 나왔고 그래서 그리고 참가자들이 확실히 한국 스타트업 생태계와 같이 연결할 기회가 없었습니다. 저는 프로그램 매니저로 일했을 때는 제가 한 번에 여기 그 한 엑셀러레이터와 같이 그 네트워킹 행사 한 번에 해보자고 했는데요. 그 제가 그 키우는 그 외국인 창업자들이 조금 그 한국 창업자들이 만나고 조금 네트워킹하고 뭐 소통하고 조금 현지 생태계 좀 알아보기 위해 기회를 제공하고 싶었는데요. 근데 그때는 운영진 그 공무원들한테 안 된다고 절대 안 된다고 얘기 들었어요. 절대 외부 업체들이 외부 기관들이랑 절대 그 행사를 운영하면 안 된다는 얘기 들었어요. 그래서 그 때문에 K-스타트업 그랜트는 참가자들이 계속 저기 판교에 있고 확실히 한국 관계자들이 연계 기회가 거의 없습니다. 그래서 그 한국 아시다시피 한국에서 인맥이 없으면 투자 유치, 뭐 정부 사업 유치, 아니면 그냥 뭐 코파운더 뭐 그 인재 채용 엄청 어렵습니다. 네.
So Marta was operating KSGC as a manager. Which year was it?
17년.
2017. So, and by then, KSGC Marta was trying to set up a networking session so that foreign entrepreneurs can be easily mixed up with the local ecosystem players. And when she reported back to the NIPA, which was the operating government institution, they said no, because they should not be connected to the outside players of our cohort. Stay in Pangyo. Don't try to make them mixed up with the other players in the market. And what Marta practically thinks is the KSCC program was not really a accelerator program for startups because it was ran by public officers. So it's more like a exchange student program in the vision. And from next year, the KSGC we used to know is not going to exist anymore. So we're going to have a very huge reformation in the KSGC, and we really have to look forward to it. 그렇다면 정말 어떤 게 달라질 것 같으세요? 내년도의 KSGC에서는? 네. What would be the biggest difference?
제 생각에는 이번에는 우선이 운영 기관이 바뀔 거예요. 바뀔 예정이고 그 두 번째는 저기 조금 커뮤니티 위주로 그 집중할 예정이 있는데요. 핵심을 진행할 예정이 있고 그리고 그것뿐만 아니라 확실히 역량보다는 그 스타트업 개수보다는 스타트업 퀄리티 조금 더 그 집중할 예정입니다. 그리고 계속 판교에서뿐만 아니라 뭐가 여기 케이스라고 그랜트 참가자들이 있는지 없는지 모르겠지만 근데 그 저기 그 일주일에 3번 3일 동안 3일 아니면 4일 동안 출석책 계속 진행하고 있는데요. 그래서 뭐 진짜 학교처럼 맨날 저기 체크인해야 하는데요. 이번에 그러기 없어질 거라고 하는데 그 대신 스타트업들이 조금 더 밖에서 나가고 여러 가지 뭐 전시회 행사를 많이 참여하는 것을 추진할 예정이 있다고 들었어요.
So what she heard is that the KSGC, the operating body, will change from NIPA to somewhere else. And also, they will be focusing much more on the quality of a company than the quantity of the cohorts. All these reporting systems or a tendency check that we had to do every 1 and 2 days, that will be also gone, and will be much more encouraged to participate in outside events, outside networking, or the exhibitions. And most of all, the program will be mainly delivered through like community-based system. All right.
근데 그거는 다 코운 말만 있는데 확실히 어떻게 될지 아직 모르잖아요. 맞아요, 소문이에요.
But this is just words in the street. We'll never know how it's going to be operated. It's all about how we execute the program. Okay, beautiful. 네, 그러면은 국장님이 이제 KSCC 같은 거는 이제 논외로 잠깐 뒤로 두고 글로벌 프로그램들에서 지금 이제 당장 한국 스타트업들 데리고 이제 WBF 행사도 가시고 다른 글로벌 프로그램들도 많이 보시게 되는데 글로벌 프로그램 입장에서는 어떤 부분들이 좀 개선돼야 된다 생각하세요? 이렇게 한국 스타트업의 글로벌 진출.
사실 우리나라의 글로벌 관련된 진출 지원 프로그램들은 대부분 트립 위주였습니다. 그 트립이나 전시 행사 참여 위주. 그러니까 실제 그 이코시스템에 들어가서 본인들이 무엇을 할 수 있을지 마켓을 어프로치 해보고 실제 막 비즈니스에 직접적으로 뛰어보고 하는 게 아니라 간접적으로 소개해주고 만나고 하는 것 위주였는데 저는 이제 조금 기대를 하고 있는 건 내년에 정부 정책상 해외 진출하는 기업에게 지분의 관계에 따라서 투자할 수 있게끔 해주겠다라고 하는 건 결국 글로벌 펀드들을 운영할 수 있게끔 열어둔다라는 거거든요. 특히 이제 엑셀러레이터가 운영하고 있는 펀드의 거의 대부분은 해외 투자가 굉장히 제한적이었습니다. 근데 내년에 이제 그렇게 열어주겠다라고 하는 건 국내 스타트업의 해외 진출을 좀 더 적극적으로 밀어주고 현지에 창업하게 됐을 때 투자할 수 있는 가능성을 계속 열어둔다는 거고 지금 많은 글로벌 관련된 지원 정책에 대부분 운영사로 엑셀러레이터들이 참여하고 있습니다. 엑셀러레이터들이 가서 KPI 채우기에 급급한 게 아니라 실제 거기 현지의 투자자랑 미팅하게 해주고 가서 어떻게 할지를 아주 프랙티컬하게 알려주는 그런 식으로 접근하고 있는데 뭐 나중에 이제 소개시켜드릴 탭 엔젤 파트너스 같은 이런 좀 유능한 엑셀러레이터들이 실질적인 글로벌 진출하고 현지에서 사업을 할 수 있는 환경을 만들어 줄 거라고 기대하는 거죠. 아마도 내년에 KCC가 어떻게 될지 모르겠지만 거기도 아마 엑셀러레이터의 역할이 크게 부각되지 않을까 기대를 할 수 있을 것 같고요. 지역에서도 마찬가지 엑셀러레이터들이 니치 마켓에 그런 글로벌 할 수 있는 스타트업을 계속 발굴하고 지원하지 않을까 생각하고 있습니다.
저 혹시 하나를 추가해도 돼요? 그 K 스타트업 그랜드 챌린지도 그렇고 그 해외 진출 프로그램 한국 스타트업 대상으로 해외 진출 프로그램에 그 KPI 관련 큰 문제가 딱 하나 있습니다. 그 보통 기관들이 바로 스타트업들이 진출하고 바로 뭐 투자 유지하고 바로 법인 설립하고 바로 확실히 그 시장에서 다 뭐 그런 기대가 많이 있잖아요. 근데 그렇게 하면 안 됩니다. 그 해외 진출 먼저는 고려하면 검증 시간이 더 필요해요. 검증하고 그 시장이 확실히 우리 제품에 우리 상품에 맞는지 안 맞는지 검증 진행해야 필요하는 과정이 필요합니다. 그거를 제 생각에는 현재까지 그 여러 가지 프로그램에 부족했습니다.
So I'll just translate both and we can move on to some of the Q&As. So what Shane sees is that usually the outbound, the global program of Korean startups until now, it was mostly about visiting exhibitions, much more like a field trip. And we really didn't have an opportunity to know about the local ecosystem, how these things work, how to operate there, and really have the taste of it. But there are some of the movements among us, like among the accelerators, actually giving the guideline how to operate abroad and just taking time and be more practical and having more direct activities at the ecosystem on site. And until now, it was mostly about hitting KPIs, hitting the numbers. But what Marta mentioned was that even these KPI setups will need to be changed into much more practical, in the eye-level point of view, numbers, and with the meanings behind it, something that's much more practical and practical and practical, I'll say. Right? Okay. So I think it's about a time to get some question from our publics. 네, 질문 있으시면 편하게 주시면 감사하겠습니다. Would there be any questions? Yep, Timothy.
More a statement rather than a question. So I think Martha mentioned the difficulty with the community in terms of the difficulty of the community in terms of, you know, 우리끼리, they want to keep it within the Korean community rather than expanding outside of the Korean border. So similar to like I mentioned earlier with the Africa section. Likewise, the focus of the Korean government always seems to be very based from a nationalistic perspective, which of course is right. They have to protect certain industries. But if you're looking at longer term future and partnerships, how do they have to breach that, or how do one of you see the Korean government breaching that in terms of the startup sector? I mean, what would you, if you were a policymaker, implement to expand that and make it easier for international business with Korean startups? I know it's kind of tricky question, but you know, we can always criticize the government, but how would you go about implementing it?
네. 뭐 편하게.
If I had a magic wand, I think what I mentioned as well is that it's not only about the policies, it's about the mentality and the way of thinking of the current Korean startup ecosystem. The accelerators, the startup founders, the startup members, but also the governments, the R&D centers, they're still not very sure about having foreign entrepreneurs here in Korea. They say they are, and they announce very beautiful things and very great policies, but I think without changing the mindset, it won't mean anything. It will be just empty policies that won't mean anything. So I think looking back at the last 8 years, I think it has changed a lot. There's more and more there's a new generation of younger founders who have had more exposure to the outside world, who, like Riso, who have been out and about and who want to interact with foreign entrepreneurs and want to bring in foreign entrepreneurs into the scene. And I think that will be slowly changing. And that the scene here will become more and more global. On the other side, the government should make it a little bit more easier and flexible for foreign entrepreneurs to set up shop here, because currently, as I mentioned, without knowing Korean, navigating the whole ecosystem, unless you're on solo startups, is very, very hard.
저는 이제 그 한국의 스타트업 정책이 최근 몇 년간 꽤 빠르게 변화하고 있는데, 그 중에 제일 많이 변화되고 있는 게 민간 투자 영역을 연계한 창업 지원 정책이 많아지고 있습니다. 특히 글로벌 스타트업을 육성하는 데 있어서 예전처럼 정부가 오롯이 100% 다 지원하거나 오롯이 다 이것저것 다 해주는 영역에서 이제는 투자 가능성 높은 기업들을 민간 투자자가 알아보고 연결시켜주는 쪽에 돈이 많이 쏠리고 있고, 그러니까 정책들이 많이 만들어지고 있고, 민간의 투자자가 연계해서 생태계가 살 수 있게끔 만드는 노력들에 대해서 굉장히 많은 공무원들이 지지를 하고 있는 분위기인 것 같아요. 특히 이제 젊은 공무원들. 그게 이제 조금씩 변화를 보고 있는 게 나이파의 프로그램이라든가 혹은 지역에 있는 여러 공무원들도 조금씩 엑셀러레이터들 받아주면서 그들로부터 글로벌 진출하게끔 만들어주는 여러 시도들이 이루어지고 있는데, 민간의 관점에서, 그러니까 정부가 기관의 지원 차원에서 스타트업을 대하는 게 아니라 민간의 투자자 관점에서 투자 가능성 있는 기업들을 민간이 선별하고 실제 투자까지 하면서 글로벌하게 해주는 이런 프로그램들이 앞으로 계속 커진다 그러면 훨씬 더 크로스보더의 관점에서 더 많은 예상치 못한 일들 혹은 뭐 기대를 훨씬 뛰어넘는 그런 일들 성과들이 나오지 않을까, 그렇게 생각해 봅니다.
So recent change in the Korean public legislation when it comes to the startup global expansion is mostly the movement is more like pushing towards the private sector's portion increase rather than the public handling the everything. And even the younger public officers are really keen about this direction because public can do a better job and that they can also invest on the startups with the quality. They know how to accelerate, they know how to incubate, and then that would really practically enable startups to go globally. But just for me personally, my point of view is that we just need to have a bit more sincerity when we are doing the works that we have to do on a daily basis, not only for the startups, also for the public. We can't detach public. But when we were even talking about KPIs, most of the KPIs are quite obvious in Korea. It's like, how many MOUs did you sign? What was the amount of LOI? Add it all up and make it into a report. How many pictures you took, and you know how many matchings is done. And often KPIs is pain in the ass for me as well. But the thing is, these days, like, still people are talking about lean startup, MVP model, but in Korea, same with the KPIs. In Korean perception, failure itself, fail quick, doesn't make sense because failure is failure. No matter how quick or how late you do it, failure is failure. So our mindset itself has to change, first of all. And also, if you are trying to foster global expansion, at least like at least for like Ministry of SMEs startup sector, they should be KPI free. That's what I think. We should let them fail or let them success because, for example, this is something that I had a chat with Derek last time. The members of Station F, which is one of the best practice of acceleration driven by government, the manager, the community manager in Station F, and the CEO of the Station F, CIO of Station F, they're all from startup backgrounds, venture capital backgrounds. These people are from the field. But if you go to Pangyo Startup Center, public officer, public officer, public officer, public officer. So we don't have the same eye level. But in the same time, if we see the interiors, outeriors, the building itself, there are so many stations in Korea. There are so many valleys in Korea that does not have the essence. So changing those perspective, KPI free, and deploying the right person with the right background and the right position would be the essential point of view that our ecosystem should be having to globalize our ecosystem. Yeah.
저는 엑셀러레이터 관점에서 좀 여쭤보겠습니다. 일단은 신규 회사나 뭐 외국이든 한국이든 창업을 해가지고 사업을 이제 제품을 개발을 하잖아요. 그러면 이제 개발된 제품을 이제 시장에서 테스트도 하고 뭐 MVP를 하든 뭐 PMF를 하든 여러 가지 해서 결국엔 매출로 회사를 성장을 해야 되는데 이 만들어진 제품 자체가 한국 기준의 인증이 없습니다. 그런 경우는 어떻게 시장에 창출해서 매출이라는 효과를 볼 수 있습니까? 그거에 대해서 정부기관이나 또는 뭐 여러 가지 인증 제도가 있습니다. 예를 NET라든지 NEP라든지 이런 신기술 인증 제도가 있지만 실질적으로 이거를 구매에 이르는 고객 입장이나 뭐 정부나 일반 사람들 입장에서는 KC 인증이나 KS 인증 외에 아는 인증들이 없기 때문에 이런 부분들에 대해서 어떻게 스타트업이 새로운 거를 런칭하고 시장에서 테스트를 할 수 있습니까?
So the question is about there are lots of different certificate process in Korea, like CE or NET, and if foreign companies are trying to come into Korea, like how are we going to support those kind of like those fundamentals, the certification they have to turn these things into a revenue, although it is MVP or whatever, like to make it as a revenue, they have to be certified and sell the product on the market. So
엑셀러레이터 관점에서 투자를 검토할 때 그 회사의 레비뉴가 있냐 없냐는 크게 중요한 사항은 아닙니다. 그 회사가 만들고자 하는 아이템의 가치가 앞으로 미래 가능성이 있냐 없냐를 보고 이 회사가 만약 인증을 받아야 된다. 혹은 어딘가에 무언가 확실한 설티피를 받아야 된다라고 하면 거기에 가장 빠르게 접근할 수 있는 루트를 엑셀러레이터가 알려줄 겁니다. 그 아이템이 가치가 있다고 여긴다면. 만약 그 아이템이 가치가 있다고 여기지 못한다면 여러 가지 관점에서 보겠죠. 이 창업팀이 만약 피봇을 할 수 있냐. 혹은 창업팀이 보시고 있는 그 영역의 마켓이 우리나라가 아니라 해외라고 하면 어떻게 접근하면 될까. 물론 그 도메인에서는 창업팀만한 지식을 가진 자가 없긴 할 겁니다. 그럼 엑셀러레이터는 가장 빠르게 접근할 수 있는 방안들을 같이 고민할 거고 그리고 투자 이후에 어떻게 변할 것인지를 예상해 두고 이제 투자가 들어갈 겁니다. 여러 가지를 이제 볼 텐데 말씀하셨던 인증을 어떻게 받을 것이냐 그건 그 도메인에 있는 사람이 제일 잘합니다. 그리고 만약 거기에 대한 그 이해가 없다라고 하면 엑셀러레이터가 전문가들을 계속 불러서 어느 방향으로 갈지를 같이 아마 찾아가게 될 거라고 여겨집니다.
okay, due to the time constraint, we're gonna close down our session for now, and we're gonna have a 5-minute break. I need some break. I need to smoke. So see you on 4:10. Please stay tuned. Thank you, Marta and Shane. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, we're coming to our last session. Yay! So after our last session, there's going to be free beers, free pizza, and celebrating our 500th community member party, along with the introduction of our new community app as well. So please stay and get ready for some pizza and beers. Now I'm going to introduce Kaha and Sang-hoon to the stage from SSV and the Tap Angel partners. Big applause, everyone. And grab a seat. All right, so today's speakers are not your usual treat that you can easily get. Very rare opportunity to invite both of our speakers. Kaha, please introduce yourself first to the public.
Hey guys, my name is Kaha. I'm a program manager at Orbit Startups. Orbit Startups helps. So should I introduce myself, also our organization? Alrighty. So we help breakthrough startups in developing markets to expand and scale beyond borders. So mainly helping startups to digitize the traditional sectors, traditional industries in the developing markets. So we really pay attention to empowering local people to gain more sources of income. Therefore, our focus is more towards the developing markets of the South, right? And we are a VC and we're also a startup program. And we know that money is good, but money is not everything that startups need. Therefore, we are helping startups with growth, with partnerships, with mentorship, with everything. So basically, we are extra team strategy member on the board forever. So because startups need help not only during a small period of time, but until they succeed, until they IPO, or until they sell their startup, or unfortunately die sometimes. So we are there with them until they need us. So, and it's great to be here at this panel.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How about Sang-hoon? Like, would you introduce yourself and Tap Angel Partners?
Hello, I'm Jin, and I'm from Tap Angel Partners. We are a startup accelerator company in Korea, and we operating TIPS and seed TIPS program, and we are operating Changgong from IBK as a big program next year. And so we are also carrying all our investment companies, and then we think we're a co-founder of our invested company, and then we communicate a lot with our company, our companies, and then so our investment companies, and then we try to value up our companies, and then yes, and then we're, especially for me, I worked in Japan and China, and then I try to the Korean startups go global, not just in Asia but to the world.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So since both of you are dealing with startup sourcing and also bring them globally or even to nurture them onto the certain level of their growth, what would be the unique experience that you guys just cannot forget when it comes to sourcing a company, like sourcing a startup to your portfolio or to the cohorts? Any unique experience from that?
Well, I go first. Yeah. In terms of unique experience, I might say just how we source startups and how is it different from maybe other accelerators or VCs, because we are ecosystem investor, right? We're ecosystem VC. We try to make our startups work with each other. One of our biggest kind of features is that we're developing the revenue share model between our startups. So if you're a startup with a lot of users but you cannot monetize them, we can connect you with a startup who has trouble with getting a lot of users but is very sticky, right? Once users come, they get a lot of money. So that's why when we source startups, we look how this startup fits in the model that we have, with which startups this startup can connect, bring help with the revenue generation or help with user generation, and this works this works in all across the globe. We have the similar system in India, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, now expanding to Africa and Latin America. So basically, once we look into startups, it can be a really great startup. It can be amazing growth and everything, but if we realize that it doesn't fit the ecosystem we are trying to build, this dispersed system of mutual support and mutual share of users, we would pass on those, right? So this is what is unique about us. We really care about how they fit in the machine that we're building, the machine that's like of mutual support.
Awesome. How about you? Would there be any unique approach? Sound?
When you look at the companies that, so I think it's everything. Every company has their unique point, but we usually, because Korea is a kind of small country, so we usually look at how this company can go global and what is the competitiveness of this company. So, for example, recently we look up some workation companies, and so they just doing very well in Korea domestically, but when they go out, the other countries, other markets, there are many regulations and then the constraint. So it's very difficult to understand such a difference in other countries, but we try to do our best to help them. So as an accelerator, so our companies go to global. So we member staffs are studying a lot for foreign cultures and then regulations.
Okay, so your chats kind of reminded me. One of my German accelerator friends told me that he never believes in founders. So like what I commonly hear is that when the investor says like, even if I ask my investor, why did you decide to invest in me? I saw in the founder. And like it commonly in Korea, if you ever talk to the investors, they often say like, I just had a gut feeling that this founder's gonna work, right? And my German friend was like telling me, nah, that's not how it works. Founder can be bad as a person and still make a really good business. And what's your point of view? Do you think in your due diligence steps, right? Like, do you see the founder market fit or the founder's capability or just the product itself? Like, what's more important on your point of view?
Well, as a early stage VC, founder is the key, And it's not about the vibes. Oh, I like how he smiled at me or he gave me a compliment. So get the check. It's not about that. It's more looking off a track record, what they have done before, and specifically for us, the main track record is how many startups he has failed previously, right? Because if it's his first startup, he's gonna screw it up in some way. Yeah, the chances of screwing up are too big, right? And only going through the failure and maybe another failure, they understand, okay, maybe I shouldn't fundraise this way next time, or shouldn't do this, hire these kind of people next time. So what we look at is, if it's a seasoned entrepreneur, so to say, he screwed up 1 or 2 or 3 times. So it's, for us, is a main kind of factor, right? And also in our case, we had startups that we invested in founder, and screwed up, and we said, okay, next startup you're gonna do, we're gonna be the first check, because we know you, and we know that you're good and you screwed up, but you learned. So next time, the chances are lower that you're gonna do the same mistake. So yeah, that's why the founder is the key for early stage startup, because what else do they have to show?
Okay, that's a fair point. Okay, what's your perspective, Sang?
I prefer the market of the business, and then because if the founder is capable, competent enough, and he or she has a good point of the market that they want to do in business. So I think the first I see the market, and then I see the founder, whether he or she can doing the business well in that market.
Okay, then my question would lead up to, since you have a multinational team, multinational experience, would it be mandatory for startups, not only in Korea, but the startup itself, mandatory for them to have a global market presence as their future aim? Or is it just okay to like become the local king or just king of the hill or very small size? But should it be mandatory for startups to aim globally?
For us specifically, this is the obligatory requirement, so to say, because we want to connect the world, right? We want to help startups to interact. Maybe the only exception could be the Indian startups, because India is its own world, right? They have 1.3 or 4 billion people, so it's kind of a lot of space to hang around. But it's not the case for Korea, right? So you can reach the borders really fast. So that's why, for example, if there's a startup who is just focusing on Korea and is comfortable there, we will say, oh, it's a great startup, but unfortunately, you will hit the wall very soon, and it's not, the vision is not big enough, right? That's why when you, for example, invest in a startup which is in Mexico, this startup already has a roadmap to expand to Colombia and then to Argentina and Brazil, and maybe afterwards to the whole world, right? Because this is also what we can help with. Our expertise in cross-border expansion, in building connections between countries and crossing borders. If a startup doesn't want that, then we are not the best fit, because our value, main value that we provide, doesn't fit them, right? Therefore, for us, unless you are an Indian startup, usually, you should be born global. Yeah.
Okay. How about Tap Angels?
As Carl referred, India, China has a big population, so I think or even in Japan, so they have a big population and economy. So I think for those countries, maybe they're just targeting domestic market. It's okay, but because I said that I point out the market the first. So for Korean companies, it's not a mandatory, but the size of your business will severely restricted if you just to target domestic market. So I think maybe it's not a mandatory, but it's 99.9%. You have to target global market, at least Asian market.
Okay. So as we're talking about, global visioning, right? At the same time, what I recognized was that only 2 or 1 out of 10 startups I get to meet in Korea actually suggest their own exit plan. They have an idea of exits. But if I get to meet other early stage startups abroad, they have a mostly very, very clear exit plan. I'm going to make an exit in 2 years. I'm going to make an exit in 3 years. And in Korea, we have very limited option of making these kind of exits. But what are the aims that early stage startups should have when it comes to an exit planning, especially when they're going globally? Because in South Korea, only exit plan that people commonly has is going public. That's it, pretty much it. So would there be any creative way that you convince your early stage startups, hey, I mean, for you, M&A is the best, or just sell the secondary shares? Like, would there be any suggestions that you have experienced?
I think it's also a cultural difference, right, what we're talking about. Because in the startups that we're working with, this is one of the questions that we discuss in the due diligence state. What is your exit strategy, right? And maybe in Korea it's more like, oh, just do cool things and expand and grow, and then it's good. I'm not so, because I'm in Korea just for 3 months, right? My main expertise is China and Southeast Asia and so on. So that's my assumption. The startups that come to us, we already discuss with them like to which companies they can do exit, right? They can say, oh, in 2 years we do this and this, and then we will talk to this corporate, and they really lacking this niche, what we're gonna cover, and we're gonna sell our company to them, right? And this is a huge plus for a startup, because it shows how strategic the founders are. They think really far ahead, right? It's not just about, it can be all not true, right? It's not can work out completely differently, but it shows how founders look really far ahead. It shows how driven by, how systematic and mission driven and goal driven they are, right? So there is no kind of template to say, okay, you sell to corporate, you do IPO, and you just die.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't work like this, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that founder needs to know what is a goal and where they need to be in specific amount of years, because this is also a proof of strategic thinking of a founder, and it also improves the chances of this founder is going to be successful in their venture.
Interesting. Okay. How about you, Salman?
Okay, so we're some startup accelerators. Actually, we don't talk much about exit plan. We're just a newborn startup companies, but in Korea, actually, going public is quite easy compared to US and Japan. So the hurdle is very low, I think, and so we are talking about M&A and going public is two options, but as a startup accelerators, we are mainly focused on the how to proof of concept of the idea of the first idea, maybe usually first idea of the founders, and then how to accelerate or how to expand those idea or those concept to going public level, the Series A or B, C levels. So I think. Of course, yes, the founders with many experiences already have their plan to go get access. So I will sell this company to blah 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 big companies, or we are going publics, but they have their own plans. But I think just let's focus on our first mission to prove of this concept.
So today and tomorrow, we focus on the market first for today, and then let's think about the exit later on. I think
I would like to add also, I think this is the main difference, right? Because what I mentioned, that we look into founders who had previous fuck ups, so to say, so they know how things are ending, and they already think about these things. While you're a first-time founder, you just try to make it, you just try not to burn in the first months. So this is also why our founders usually think about this, because they've been through this stuff, and they maybe exited, they died, or they pivoted, and they already think about this kind of stuff. This is also one of the reasons why we invest in
second, third
time founder, because they think about this kind of stuff. And if you're a fresh college graduate, the first startup, you don't go so far. You just live with tomorrow and maybe next week. Yeah.
I see.
Everyone has his first time, so I think we have to fairly care of all the startups.
Yeah. So I'm also a first-time founder, somehow making through fourth year, and still, I don't think I'm gonna do a better job if I become a second time, but I'm learning my lessons. I see. So, both of you are mentioning about founders so many times about founders. What are the common findings that you guys found from the founders when considering your successful portfolio companies? What were the commonalities? Was it their resilience, or their smartness, their experience at the market, third time failure, second time failure? What were the commonalities that you guys found from the successful founders?
Commonalities in terms of previous experience?
Yeah.
So with most of founders, the fact that they did startups before in their markets, it means that first of all, they already have a good network, right? So this is very important. Everything is connections, right? And if you worked in that area, in that market, it means that you already accumulated right amount of of connections that help you with business. And another is that you already know. I think the working with people is the hardest, right? Many people do first mistakes that they hire a friend or hire people that they have good vibes about, but in the end it doesn't work out. So people who are like second or third founders, they already know that you just don't go only with gut feeling about the person's vibe, right? So you know how to do due diligence on people. Therefore, the founders, they have good connections. They know which right people to hire, and also they know better their strengths, right? Some people may think that I'm good at product, or I'm good at managing operations, but in the end they find out their strength and their niche, and that's why it's also what characterizes founders who are more mature, that they know specifically where they're good at, and they know what they are lacking, so they're finding the right people, and the people they find are the HR that they do is more successful than for the first-time founders. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
I think yes, I think some common in founders. I think the passion, and passion means that the energy to create a strategies for their business. So even if it fails or not, whether it fails or not, they spend a lot of time to think about the strategy of their business. I think that's the first one. And the second one is those passions and energies they have enough energies and passions to attract their partners, co-workers, colleagues, and then doing business together. I think that's the second one.
I see. So my first investment I received was last year, and my investor, he rarely gets in touch with me, right? So once in every half a year, he kind of calls me and say, "You're still alive, aren't you?" And he just checks me in, "You're still alive?" And yeah, I am. Like, are you generating some revenue? I'm like, we'll see you next year, you know. I mean, we're going on a good path, you know. And I was always curious about, like, when it comes to big boys like you guys running multiple different cohorts, batches from here and there, from like Southeast Asia, China, Korea. What would be your average touch base duration with your portfolio companies checking up? And what would be your suggestion? What would be the most healthy average touch base points with startups in your point of view? Yeah.
It's a great question, and it's a very important question. And this is a reason why so before we were accelerator, and now you never will see word accelerator next to like Orbit or SOSV, because acceleration means the startup is with you for 3 to 6 months. You work with them very intensively, and then you let them fly. And some things can happen, good things or bad things. You already look from far away. And this is not the best strategy, especially if you also put money in those startups, right? We are a VC, so we invest in startups and then we work with them. So if they go, like, leave the door and they stumble right away and like screw up, it's not good for us either, right? So that's why we transitioned into lifelong program, which means that we are with startups forever, as long as they need us. And we have team members that work with them on constant basis. With regards to what is a cadence, it depends on startups. Some startups are earlier than others, so they need a lot of intensive support on strategy, on fundraising, on growth. Some startups are already getting to unicorn stage, right? They don't need us so much, so we just check in once in a quarter, maybe once a half a year, and because they're busy, right? They don't need us as much because they already have accumulated so many great people in the team. But if you're a startup and you just have 4 people, you don't know like what to do, and you're afraid to make a wrong decision, or you don't know where to get resources. We are there to help you, right? And we are like as you mentioned, we are also like one of the co-founders. that whenever you have a challenge, you can talk either to our growth team or our investment team or our BD team, and they all have a dedicated team member for, like, within our company for different purpose, right? So they always know that whenever they have challenge, they can call us weekly or maybe bi-weekly. So it's all based on demand. Whatever startup needs for their success, we are there.
So you don't reach out to them first, but you just let them reach out to you whenever they're in need.
Oh, we do reach out, and we'll see how startups come back to us. Some startups ditch us, right? They say, we don't want to talk to you. So, all right. We reach out to them maybe in half a year again, like, hello. And they're like, no response, so we don't. But if there are startups that really need our help, they reach out to us themselves, right? So it's like in a relationship, you don't knock on a door, and if no one opens to you, you don't knock forever, right?
Yeah.
If there are people who are really happy to see you and they feel value in you, they'll come and you'll be working together. So it's kind of this way.
Okay.
Okay, then as I mentioned, so we think ourselves as a co-founder, and then community, we are operating community together. So we frequently contact our startups, and then of course, and then our startups contact us frequently. So we just work together, I think. So we also have lawyers and an accountant and the patent managers inside our company. So we are giving the intensive support, and we are very tightly coupled. Yes, some almost every day we contact it as if they want. But yeah, if they're doing well, some unicorn companies, and they have good lawyers, law firms, of course. Yes, and if they have enough, and then they don't need our support, not that much. And so we are not that contact frequently.
Okay.
There's a saying, like, you can bring the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink, right? Yeah. We're bringing them to resources, and if they don't want to drink from those resources, it's up to them, right?
We are delivering water bottles to the horse directly, so we don't bring the horse.
I see. That's why my investor was asking me if I'm still alive, because he haven't brought me any water for a while.
Is anyone else bringing you water? He was like checking in, right?
I'm just digging, I'm just digging. Yeah. I mean, like, if investor and founder gets too close, I think that could be a bit burdening. But for me, I'm just in a really right distance, like once in a while when we have a work together, like that's just good enough. But if we get too close, it feels like it's like having a second mom at an office, like, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do that? It's checking up on it. It's just very stressing. Sometimes I know it's from all good deeds, but still, yeah.
That's why it's very important while you choose investor, right? It's like choosing a spouse. Nowadays, it's even more important because the average marriage lasts less time than time you spend with your investor.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So okay, not only we're talking about like investors like a changing spouse, and how about co-founder? We have a similar saying with the co-founder. What's your belief on the co-foundership? Do you think startups are much more healthier when they have a co-founder or when they're a solo?
Well, solo founder is never good. It's like at least for us, it's always a red flag, right? Because doing startup is such a stressful work, and it really affects your mental health and capacity, right? So first of all, there's a chance the startup will not be able to withhold this stress. And secondly, if you're doing such a great thing, why can't you convince others to do the thing with you, right, as co-founder? So it's also a question, right? If you cannot hire or inspire a co-founder, how you can sell your startup to investors and to the market, right? That's why a co-founder is very important, mental health-wise, resource-wise, and also in terms of sharing the vision.
I see. How about your point of view?
I think I prefer the solo single founders than
Okay.
the co-founders because usually the startup means a lot of responsibilities, but if there are too many co-founders, and then the responsibility is just divided. So I think there should be a person who takes the whole responsibility of this company or business in the early stage. So that's why I prefer single solo founder.
Yeah, I was just checking if my co-founder arrived because he started his meeting on 3 p.m. Having a co-founder is a difficult job. Trust me. I met my co-founder at a football club, and we've been in a co-foundership for 4 months. And all of my team members in the football club always tells me I'm going to be a really good husband. Riso, you're gonna make a wonderful husband because you've been dealing with that guy for 4 years with zero fight. We never fought, and yeah. So having a co-founder is a tough deal. It's a tough deal. Yeah. So solo founder I also trust, but co-foundership is also, you know, it's worth it. It's worth the hassle, and you get to learn this person, and then you get into a teamwork strong enough. Then I think that's the point where you start to have a synergy, less than energies out of your drains. So yeah.
It's just the thing is that you as one person cannot be good at everything, right? So that's why just for that you need a co-founder. Maybe you're great at selling your stuff, but not as good as building a back-end stuff, which requires maybe more introvert people, just like turning off and going in a dark space and doing stuff, right? So that's why you co-founders also filling in the gaps that you have, because there are no perfect people. There are no like well-rounded folks. But also, as mentioned, too many co-founders is another like a red flag, right? It's chaos. When we see like there's 6 co-founders, like why do you need so many people? So yeah, when it's like 2, 3, then it's good. Then you see like, okay, this guy is good at marketing. This guy is building things in darkness, so it's good that they have them, and another person is good with people. So
I see.
yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, the co-founders doesn't mean that I also agree with Kaha that we in startup need good co-workers. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I'm the founder. Means that solo founder means that the leader should be one that the leader should take all the responsibility. But yeah, of course, some startup, the leader need good assistants and good co-workers and partners.
Okay, I'll see. Okay, so for today, when I was preparing the topic, it all started off from what's more important, deal sourcing or accelerating. The reason that I thought about this topic was because past 1 year, when I'm opening up these kind of events, and whenever I try to bring in like known accelerator from abroad, the most common question asked by the South Korean accelerators was like, what's your due diligence model? And how do you source these deals, good deals, like your 100 times exit deals? How did you source them? And what they often tell me behind the stage is like, no, it's not about sourcing, it's more about accelerating. And some of them say, oh, nah, we were just lucky, right? And what's your point of view? Like, is it more important to source the right startup, or is it more important to accelerate in the right path?
Can we say both?
No, like if you lean towards it, you know.
Well, because this is like a gamble, right? This is just investing in different cryptos. You know, you don't know which one will shoot. And literally, like our startups in our 200 startup portfolio, one startup we invested in 5 years ago became a unicorn, and it kind of covered all our costs for like all the years. For example, and it's apparently was a crypto startup. So due diligence is very important. This is a very tough one. I really cannot say. It's important to find right people, but if you find right people and you cannot show them the path where to go, then it's also kind of doesn't work, right? So I cannot choose one. These both are very important. I just want to say that acceleration, not acceleration, but more like support, like strategic support, like as a co-founder. Otherwise, if it's choice between due diligence and the 3 months acceleration, then for sure due diligence. But if you work with a startup, like past investment for years, then I would say this provides more value to a startup and increases their chances of success and our chances of good exits as well.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
As an accelerator, of course, accelerating is more important. And then the other reason is that the sourcing is of the for startups, so the pre-startup startups. I think it's in Korea. Those people, the founders, have enough information and knowledge about how to send their IR mails, and then they have a list of, for example, tips accelerators. So they send. I think they send almost every emails to those tips investment companies, so VC or accelerators. So I think it's every accelerator can get information or get emails, but I think the accelerating is more important because we are accelerators. How we do accelerate will be reviewed. Those pre-startups, next future startups can evaluate us. So I think we are focusing on accelerating more than the sourcing itself.
I see. So before we open it up to the public for more questions to come in, just one last question. This is becoming my franchise last question. What's the future sector that you guys are thinking highly potential for 2024? Would be the best sector that you guys would be most interested in to put it up on the table? Interesting sector. For me personally, I know nothing about quantum, but like quantum computing, just gut feeling, this is going to be the next cycle, because it's been kind of quiet for like several years, and then it's becoming a new topic more and more. So I was like, maybe just by luck. But if you would have any sector interest.
Maybe it will not sound like a sector, but application of AI and generative AI. This is not a sector, it's a tool, right? But if a startup applies these tools, this startup has higher chance of success in the future, right? Because as I say, AI will not replace you, but the people who use AI wisely will replace you, right? So if our founders are able to use these cutting edge technologies and being in tune with that, then they can survive this coming revolution, right? So that's why I would say it's not ed tech or fintech or crypto, but it's people who are able to ride the wave of the AI revolution that we are having. And I'm sure we are just seeing the very beginning. It's already mind-blowing what's happening, but it's gonna go bigger. That's why the founders need to be able to adopt their startups to the new reality. So yeah.
I see. How about you, Tom?
As an expert of computer programming, I think I agree with Kaha. There's the software, some AI or machine learning that improve the productivity of the workers, and then so we need less workers to achieve more things. That was the first one, and then the second one I'm personally interested in is food, agriculture, food. So some automation of such a producing and then reducing pollution and then increasing the productivity of such a food and agriculture. Yes, I think it's a good sector.
Okay. So now is the time for our public to ask the questions that you might want to ask. Nas? Yeah, there's a mic coming up.
How do you compare second or third round founder with a first-time founder who has years of experience at her field?
Is it a question to me? Okay, I will start first. because we do invest in second and third time founders. Do you mean the experience in other startup or experience in some corporate or? Yeah, this is a requirement for sure, but being a founder is very different experience than just knowing your industry well, because it involves so many different factors, right? Involves operation, involves working with people, selling your product, having network, and if you're just very good at your area, it's not entirely enough. Maybe you're gonna be very good at all the points that I just mentioned, but there is no data on this, right, for us. And as any VC, we try to minimize the risk of our investment, and we need this data, right? This person is very great in the, for example, healthcare area, and she had this experience and she did that and she raised so much money, so we know, okay, she covers these things, so she really decreases the risk of our investment. That's why we consider. But without that, it's very hard for us to do this decision because the risk is very high. Yeah.
I think it's the multiple founders, multiple entrepreneurs. Yes, yeah, that's good. But you know that I already told you that everyone has his first time. So I think the more important thing is that how he or she understand the market itself. I already mentioned the market, importance of the market. So of course that if he or she already founded several companies, they understand the procedures, they understand how to communicate with the accelerators, venture capitals. So it's very easy. It's also very comfortable for us, but being comfortable is not our job, so we are trying to help the first founders. But the most important thing is how you understand the market itself, that you wanna do business.
Yeah, that's a great thing about the VC space. There are VCs who focus on different things and they look for different founders. So it happened to be like for us, this is a criteria, early stage startups, but with several times of experience before. But I think the majority of early VC investors, they don't have this requirement. Therefore, it's just a question of reaching out to as many VCs as you can. Yeah.
See, okay. Any other questions? No? Then I'm gonna ask mine. So another common questions that I used to get from startups is like, how should I write a cold mail, right? And what are the chances of getting a response from an investor, accelerator, VCs, to get to have a second meeting, or like I found an interest from your pitch deck. Would there be any tips, or like what's your idea on the cold mailing from the startups, like just directly to you and say, hey, this is my company. How can I get invested? We're looking for fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think it works? And to do so, what should be the tone and manners? What's your tips?
Well, first of all, to answer a question, the chances of success like this are low. Because as mentioned, we are VC, we are trying to minimize the risks. And if you are just random email in our mailbox, which feels very much as like mass send, that's not good, right? Now with the generative AI and ChatGPT, it can be very, very like tailored. So now it's also a risk. But the ideal is to have a referral for someone. You see, okay, there is this Kaha guy from Orbit Startups, SOSV. I'm very interested in this VC. So let me check his LinkedIn. Maybe we have some common connection, and I will ask this common connection to introduce me. Right? Then I say, okay, I know he reached out to Riso, and Riso recommended this guy to me, and I say, okay, I know Riso. Riso will not recommend to me some shady random person, hopefully. So because I know Riso and I know that he's a legit person, I will say, okay, then I will take this deck. I spend time, because this is time investment of for everyone in a VC company as well. And then if I think that this fit, I will transition it to next stage of due diligence, right? With LinkedIn, you can always find these kind of ways, right?
I see.
Referral is the key. That's what I say.
True.
We all check our cold mails, so don't worry about it. And then www.tedapps.com. Yeah, please send us cold mails. And then we have a designated step to review every cold mails. And then we pick up, of course, some good candidate, and then we have meetings. So usually it takes 2 or 3 weeks, but yeah, we do check, so don't worry about it. But yeah, important thing is if you have a good experience, you have to specify your market, your business, and then your members. And yeah, those are, if that is not that clear, so we don't send reply. But yeah, we check it. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's the key, right? So we also check because that would be weird, right? We don't check. But the way of treatment you get is different, right? If it comes through referral to a person from the network, then we definitely will pay more attention, and then maybe some junior investment team member will review. If the referral comes from our mentor, then it's totally different. They'll say then our general partner already, like a high level, will already have conversation with this person because this is a high quality referral, right? So it's just increases your chances of getting a right
contacts,
attention.
attentions. Yeah.
If you just drop a cold mail, it can be overlooked. If you go through a person or maybe a mentor in our program, then chances amplify manifold.
Wow. Okay. So lesson number 1: make a LinkedIn account, please. Korean people, make a LinkedIn account. Number 2: become a friend with Riso. And number 3: reach out to Kaha. And number 4: make a cold mail to Tap Angel Partners. So now you have 2 referrals already. So yeah, so I think our time's up for today. Thank you so much, Kaha. Thank you so much, Sang-hoon. Another round of a big applause to our speakers. Yes, so our pizza's coming. Our beers are getting colder. And then please enjoy the night. And I'm going to come up to the stage very soon with a big QR code that you would like to scan. And stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.